I came home a week early from a job site in Nevada only to find my own house locked against me, but that was nothing compared to what I found in the backyard. My daughter was trapped in a tool shed for 3 days without water, and when I finally broke the lock, her first words were not thank you. She grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before, and whispered, "Don't look in the pool. Dad, whatever you do, don't look in the pool." But I looked, and what I saw made me realize that the man inside my house was not just a thief, he was a monster. My name is Booker King and I am 68 years old. I have spent my entire life working with concrete and steel, analyzing load-bearing walls and ensuring that skyscrapers do not collapse under their own weight. I built my life the same way I built those structures, with patience, precision, and a lot of hard work. I am a structural engineer by trade and a father by choice. My wife passed away 5 years ago, leaving me with my only daughter, Aaliyah. I thought I had secured her future. I thought I had built a foundation strong enough to protect her. But as I drove my old Ford truck down the familiar streets of my neighborhood in Atlanta, I realized that the hardest concrete can crack if you do not see the pressure building up. I had been away for 2 weeks supervising a bridge repair in the next state. I was tired. My bones ached in that deep way they do when you push 70 but refuse to retire. All I wanted was a hot shower and to sit in my leather armchair. I pulled up to the electronic gate of the house I had designed and built with my own hands 30 years ago. I punched in the code. Nothing happened. I punched it in again, thinking my thick fingers had slipped. The red light blinked at me aggressively. Access denied. I sat there for a moment, the engine of my truck idling, confusing, clouding my mind. I knew that code better than my own social security number. It was my wedding anniversary. I looked through the iron bars of the gate. In the driveway where my truck usually sat was a bright red sports car, low to the ground and flashy. Next to it was a beige sedan that I recognized immediately. It belonged to the Wyatts, my son-in-law's parents. A heavy bass line thumped from inside the house, vibrating the front windows. It was not just loud music, it was a violation. My house was supposed to be a sanctuary, not a nightclub. I pulled my phone out and dialed Aaliyah. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. A cold knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach. Aaliyah always answered. She knew I checked in every night at 7 sharp. For her to change the gate code and ignore my calls was impossible, unless she wasn't the one doing it. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I could have honked. I could have shouted. But 40 years on construction sites taught me that when something doesn't look right, you don't just charge in, you assess the structure first. You look for the cracks. I backed my truck up quietly, parking it down the street under the shade of an oak tree. I grabbed the heavy iron crowbar from my toolbox behind the seat. It was heavy, cool, and reassuring in my hand. I walked back to the house, but I didn't go to the front door. The music was too loud inside for anyone to hear me anyway. I moved to the side of the property where the brick wall was slightly lower, covered in ivy. My knees protested as I pulled myself up and over, dropping silently onto the grass of my own backyard. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't the smell of jasmine and freshly cut grass that I worked so hard to maintain. It was the smell of neglect. Trash bags were piled up against the back patio door. Beer bottles lay scattered in the grass. But there was something else, a smell I couldn't quite place, sharp and chemical, hanging heavy in the humid air. I crept along the shadows of the house, avoiding the light spilling out from the kitchen windows. Inside I could see silhouettes moving, laughter, clinking glasses. I saw Hunter, my son-in-law, walking past the window holding a bottle of champagne. He looked like he owned the world. He looked like a man celebrating a victory. I turned away, my anger boiling, but then I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it over the thumping bass of the music. It was a scratching sound, like a trapped animal trying to dig its way out. It was coming from the old tool shed at the far corner of the yard. I approached the shed slowly. The grass here was overgrown, as if no one had walked this way in weeks. The shed was a sturdy structure. I had reinforced it myself years ago to store my expensive equipment. But as I got closer, I saw something new. A heavy industrial chain was wrapped around the handles, secured with a brand new shiny padlock. The scratching sound came again, followed by a low, dry whimper. It was a sound of pure despair. I stepped closer and tapped the wood gently with my crowbar. The scratching stopped instantly. "Aaliyah," I whispered, my voice rough. "Is that you?" There was a silence that lasted a heartbeat, and then a frantic thumping against the door. "Daddy." The voice was a rasp, a dry husk of a sound. "Daddy, help me." The rage that hit me then was blinding. It was not the slow burn of the gate code or the messy yard. This was an explosion. My daughter was in there. I didn't bother trying to pick the lock. I jammed the flat end of the crowbar between the chain and the door handle. I braced my foot against the shed wall and pulled with everything I had. I am 68, but I have spent a lifetime bending steel. The wood groaned, the metal screeched, and with a loud snap, the hasp tore right out of the frame. I threw the door open. The smell that hit me was the stench of human waste and sweat. It was pitch black inside. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Aaliyah was curled up in the corner on a pile of old drop cloths. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her eyes were sunken dark circles, bruising the skin beneath them. Her hands were zip-tied together. She looked at the light and flinched, shielding her eyes. "Baby girl," I breathed, rushing to her. I pulled a pocket knife from my belt and sliced the plastic ties. She fell into my arms, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. She felt frail like a bird. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. "How long have you been in here?" 3 days, she croaked. "No water." He locked me in. He said he would let me out when I signed the papers. I tried to help her stand, but she was too weak. I needed to get her into the house. I needed to get her water, and then I was going to tear Hunter apart with my bare hands. "Come on," I said, lifting her up. "Let's go inside." "No," she gasped, her fingers digging into my arm with surprising strength. "No, Daddy, you can't. He will kill us. You have to leave. You have to go get the police." "I am not leaving you here," I said firmly. "You don't understand," she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. Her eyes darted toward the back of the yard, toward the swimming pool. "He is crazy, Daddy. He lost everything. The crypto, the real estate deals. It was all a lie. He owes money to bad people." "We will deal with that later," I said, trying to move her toward the gate. "No," she hissed, pulling me back into the shadows of the shed. "You don't know what he did. 2 days ago, his partner came here, the man he owed money to. They were arguing by the pool. I was watching from the window before he locked me in here. Hunter hit him, Daddy. He hit him with a shovel." I froze. Aaliyah was sobbing now, her body convulsing. "He fell into the pool," she whispered. "He wasn't moving. Hunter didn't call the police. He called a cement truck." My blood ran cold. The chemical smell in the air, the smell I couldn't place. It was wet concrete. "Don't look in the pool," she begged, clutching my shirt. "Don't look in the pool." I had to look. I left her leaning against the shed wall and took 3 steps out into the yard. I shined my flashlight toward the kidney-shaped pool that had been the center of our family barbecues for 20 years. It was gone. The water was gone. In its place was a flat gray slab of fresh, wet concrete filling the pool almost to the brim. It was a tomb, a massive, undeniable tomb right in my backyard. I stood there staring at the gray expanse, my mind racing to calculate the volume, the weight, the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. He had buried a man in my house, and he had locked my daughter in a shed to keep her quiet. Before I could process the horror, the back door of the house swung open. The music swelled louder for a second, then was cut off as the door slammed shut. "Well, well, well," a voice called out. I turned the flashlight beam, cutting through the darkness. Hunter stood on the patio steps. He was wearing one of my expensive silk robes, the one Aaliyah had given me for Christmas. In his hand he held a wooden baseball bat, tapping it rhythmically against his leg. I was wondering when the old man would show up, he said, his voice slurring slightly with alcohol, but his eyes sharp and dangerous. "You are early, Booker. You weren't supposed to be back until next week. That is very inconvenient for me." I gripped the crowbar in my hand. My knuckles turned white. I looked from the monster on my porch to the tomb in my yard, and then back to my terrified daughter cowering in the shed. "Where is my daughter, Hunter?" I asked, my voice low and steady, masking the fear that was trying to claw its way up my throat. "She is on a little vacation." He laughed, stepping off the porch onto the grass. "And you are about to join her." He raised the bat and started walking toward me. I realized then that there was no leaving. There was no running to the police, not yet. He wasn't going to let us walk out of that yard alive. I was an old man, tired and outnumbered in my own home. But as I watched him approach, I remembered something. I remembered that I knew every inch of this property. I knew where the soft ground was. I knew where the electrical lines ran. And I knew that a man who builds things knows exactly how to take them apart. I lowered the crowbar, slightly feigning weakness, letting my shoulders slump. I needed him to think I was just a scared old man. I needed him to underestimate me. Because if I was going to save my daughter, I couldn't just fight him. I had to destroy him. Hunter smiled, seeing my posture soften. "That is right, Pop," he sneered. "Don't make this hard. Just give up." I took a step back, pretending to stumble, but my eyes were locked on his, scanning for weakness. The game had begun, and he had no idea who he was playing against. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your family from a wolf in sheep's clothing. The baseball bat hovered in the humid night air, a wooden pendulum of violence ready to swing down on my skull. Hunter stood there, his silhouette framed by the artificial light spilling from the kitchen door, his chest heaving with the adrenaline of a man cornered. I could see the whites of his eyes, maniacal and bloodshot. He was not looking at a father-in-law, he was looking at a loose end, a structural flaw in his plan that needed to be hammered out. My grip on the heavy iron crowbar tightened. Every instinct in my body, honed by decades of hard labor on dangerous construction sites, screamed at me to swing first. I knew how to generate force. I knew the weak points of the human frame just as I knew the weak points of a steel beam. One solid blow to his knee or his temple, and this threat would be neutralized. The rage in my gut was a living thing, a fire demanding release. He had buried a man in my backyard. He had locked my baby girl in a dark box like an animal. He deserved to be broken. But then my engineer mind took over. It happened in a split second, the way a safety protocol kicks in before a disaster. I ran the calculation. I was 68 years old. Strong, yes, but slow. Hunter was 35, desperate and fueled by whatever substances he had been consuming. If I swung and missed, or if I didn't take him down instantly, he would beat me to death right here on the grass. And then Aaliyah would be alone. She would be trapped in that shed, witness to her father's murder, waiting for her own turn. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't gamble with her life. I had to become something else. I had to become the one thing a narcissist like Hunter would never fear. I had to become a victim. I let my fingers spasm. The heavy crowbar slipped from my grasp and landed with a dull thud on the soft earth. I didn't flinch. Instead, I let my shoulders collapse forward, curving my spine into the question mark of old age. I relaxed the muscles in my face, letting my jaw go slack, my mouth hanging open slightly. I forced my eyes to lose their focus, to drift past him as if I were trying to catch smoke. I started to tremble, not with fear, but with a simulated palsy, a rhythmic shaking of my hands that I had seen in the old men at the park, the ones who fed pigeons and forgot their own names. Hunter stopped. The bat halted mid-swing. He blinked, confused by the sudden change in my posture. He had been ready for a fight, ready to crush a threat. He didn't know what to do with a heap of crumbling masonry. "Hunter," I rasped, my voice cracking and pitching higher than usual. "Is that you, son?" He lowered the bat an inch, his eyes narrowing. "What are you playing at, Booker?" I took a shuffling step forward, dragging my left foot slightly. I squinted at him as if the darkness was a thick fog I couldn't penetrate. Why is it so dark out here? I was looking for Aaliyah. She said she was making pot roast. Is it Sunday? Did I miss church? I saw the tension in his shoulders drop. The predator in him was assessing the prey and deciding it wasn't worth the energy of a kill. Not yet, anyway. He stepped closer, the bat now resting on his shoulder like a toy. He invaded my personal space, bringing with him the smell of expensive bourbon, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. He reached out and slapped me. It wasn't a winding blow, but it was sharp and stinging, an open-handed strike across my cheek. It was a test. A man with his wits about him would have reacted with anger. A man with pride would have flinched or raised a hand to defend himself. I did neither. I let my head rock to the side with the blow and then slowly turned back to face him, my expression vacant and confused. I raised a trembling hand to my cheek and touched the stinging skin. "Why did you do that?" I whined, letting a note of pathetic, childish hurt bleed into my voice. "I just want my dinner. Where is my girl?" Hunter let out a short, cruel laugh. It was the sound of relief. He thought he had won. He thought the formidable Booker King, the man who could stare down union bosses and inspectors, had finally succumbed to the ravages of time. "You are losing it, old man," he sneered, leaning into my face. His breath was sour. "You really are gone, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I just looked at his silk robe and frowned. "That looks like mine." Did Aaliyah buy you one too? He shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. Yeah, Pops. She bought me everything. Now listen to me. Aaliyah isn't here. I felt a spike of panic, but I pushed it down deep. Not here. But she said. She is on vacation. He interrupted, his voice smooth and condescending, the way one speaks to a toddler. She went to the beach. Don't you remember? She told you yesterday. You must have forgotten again. You are always forgetting things lately, Booker. I let my mouth hang open, processing this lie. Vacation, I mumbled. But the pot roast. Forget the roast, he snapped, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my bicep with unnecessary force. You need to get inside. You are wandering around like a stray dog. He pulled me toward the house, but then he stopped. We were standing right next to the shed. I could feel Aaliyah's presence through the wood. I knew she was in there, holding her breath, terrified, praying I wouldn't leave her. And I knew Hunter knew it too. This was the cruelty of the man. He wanted to show me his power. He let go of my arm and reached into the pocket of the silk robe. He pulled out a small silver key. He looked at me, his eyes glinting with malice, and then he turned to the shed door. He slotted the key into the shiny new padlock. I held my breath. Was he going to open it? Was he going to show me his trophy? He turned the key, but not to open it. He twisted it to ensure it was locked tight. He gave the heavy iron chain a rattle, the metal clanking loudly in the silence of the yard. Just checking the locks, he said, casually pocketing the key. Can't be too careful. Lots of valuable tools in there, right, Booker? We wouldn't want anyone stealing your legacy. The message was clear. He held the key. He held the power. My daughter was a tool in his box, and I was just a spectator. It took every ounce of my willpower not to grab his throat and squeeze until his eyes popped. But I forced myself to nod vacantly. Safety first, I mumbled, my engineer's mantra turned into a senile parrot's phrase. Safety first. Good boy, he said, patting my cheek, the same one he had slapped. Now move. He shoved me toward the back door. I stumbled, my feet catching on the uneven pavers of the patio. I didn't look back at the shed. I couldn't. If I looked back, I would break, I would scream. And that would get us both killed. I focused on the concrete slab of the patio. I focused on the texture of the stone. I focused on the physics of putting one foot in front of the other while my world burned down around me. We entered the kitchen. The transition from the humid, dark garden to the bright, air-conditioned house was jarring. The music was deafening inside a wall of electronic noise that rattled the expensive copper pots hanging above the island. The kitchen, my wife had designed the kitchen where we had rolled out biscuit dough and laughed over morning coffee, was unrecognizable. Pizza boxes were stacked on the granite countertops, grease staining the stone. Empty wine bottles lined the windowsill like soldiers. The sink was overflowing with dirty dishes. But it was the smell that hit me hardest. Stale smoke, spilled beer, and the underlying rot of uncollected garbage. It smelled like a frat house after a weekend bender, not the home of a respected professional. Hunter marched me through the kitchen, kicking a stray beer can out of the way. He didn't offer me a chair. He didn't offer me water. He pushed me toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Go to bed, old man, he shouted over the music. And stay there. If I see you wandering around again, I will tie you to the bed. Do you understand? I nodded my head, bobbing loosely. Bed. Yes, I am tired. He steered me down the hall past Aaliyah's room, which was dark and shut, and toward the master bedroom at the end of the corridor. My room. The room I had built for my wife with the bay window she loved. He opened the door and shoved me inside. I stumbled into the darkness and almost fell over a stack of boxes. I fumbled for the light switch, my hand shaking not from acting this time, but from pure shock. The light flickered on, illuminating a scene of absolute disrespect. My furniture was gone. The hand-carved four-poster bed, the antique dresser, the reading chair where I spent my Sundays, all gone. In their place were stacks of cardboard boxes, old tires, a broken lawnmower, and bags of trash that smelled of sour milk. They had turned my sanctuary into a dump. A mattress lay on the floor in the corner, bare and stained with no sheets. "This is where you sleep now," Hunter sneered from the doorway. "Cozy, right? Just like you deserve." He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed the door handle and slammed it shut. I heard the lock click. Then I heard something else, the sound of a heavy chair being dragged and wedged under the knob from the outside. He was barricading me in. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the garbage of my life. My hands finally stopped shaking and clenched into fists so tight my fingernails cut into my palms. I was a prisoner in my own home. My daughter was in a box outside, and a murderer was drinking my wine in the kitchen. But he had made a mistake. He had put me in the one room in the house where the ventilation ducts connected directly to the living room. I had designed the HVAC system myself to ensure optimal airflow. I knew how sound traveled in this house. I moved silently to the vent near the floor. It was blocked by a stack of old magazines, but I pushed them aside gently. I lay down on the dirty mattress, pressing my ear against the metal grate. The music had been turned down. I could hear footsteps, heavy pacing, and then I heard Hunter's voice, clear and amplified by the metal ductwork. He was on the phone. "Yeah, Mom. Pick up. It is me." There was a pause. I held my breath. "Yeah, the old man is back. He just walked in from the yard." "No, I don't know how he got in." "He is totally gone, Mom. Brain like mush. He didn't even ask about the pool. He thinks Aaliyah is on vacation." Another pause. Hunter laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "No, he isn't a problem. He is weak. I pushed him around and he just took it. But we can't have him wandering around, not with the buyer coming tomorrow." My heart hammered against my ribs. A buyer. He was selling the house. "Yeah, I know," Hunter said, his voice dropping lower, taking on a sinister edge. "The plan has to change. We can't wait for nature to take its course. He is too healthy. He could live for another 10 years. I pressed my ear harder against the cold metal, the grate leaving an imprint on my skin. "Bring the heavy stuff, Mom." "The ketamine." "Yeah. We are going to have a little family dinner tonight. We will put him to sleep. And this time, he isn't going to wake up." The line went dead. I lay there on the filthy mattress, staring at the ceiling. They were going to kill me. Tonight. I sat up slowly. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I looked around the room at the junk they had piled in here. Old tools, broken furniture, discarded wire. They saw trash. I saw raw materials. Hunter thought he had locked a senile old man in a room to die. But he had just locked a structural engineer in a room full of spare parts, and he had given me a deadline. I stood up and walked to the window. It was nailed shut, but the glass was thin. I looked at the old lawnmower in the corner. I looked at the electrical cord of a broken lamp. I wasn't going to wait for dinner. If they wanted to play games, I would show them how the game was played. I wasn't just going to escape. I was going to bring the whole house down on top of them. The door to my prison room burst open and light flooded in, blinding me after hours in the darkness. Hunter stood there silhouetted like a prison warden. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed the collar of my shirt and hauled me up. My knees buckled. I wasn't acting this time. The hunger and the stress were taking a toll on my 68-year-old body, but I forced my legs to work. I shuffled along, letting him drag me down the hallway, the plush carpet I had installed for my wife, feeling miles away under my feet. We entered the dining room, and the scene that greeted me made my stomach churn with a rage hot enough to melt steel. My dining table. The mahogany table I had custom ordered from a craftsman in Charleston was set for a banquet. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. The rich aroma of seared ribeye steak and rosemary filled the air. Sitting at the head of the table where I had presided over Thanksgiving dinners for 30 years, sat a man I barely recognized, Mr. Wyatt, Hunter's father. He was a small man with thin lips and eyes like a shark. He was cutting into a thick steak using my silverware, drinking my expensive Cabernet. Next to him sat Mrs. Wyatt, a woman whose face was pulled so tight by plastic surgery she looked permanently surprised. Hunter shoved me toward a wooden chair in the corner away from the table. I stumbled and caught myself on the backrest, my hands shaking. "Look who decided to join the living," Mrs. Wyatt said without looking up from her plate. She dabbed the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin. I slumped into the chair, letting my head hang low, chin to chest. I watched them through my eyelashes. They were eating like kings in a castle they had conquered. They didn't see a man. They saw a nuisance, a pest they hadn't quite figured out how to exterminate yet. Hunter walked over to his mother and kissed her cheek. "Sorry about the smell, Mom. I haven't had time to hose him down." Mrs. Wyatt wrinkled her nose and actually held the napkin up to her face. "It is revolting, Hunter. It smells like a nursing home in here. Can't you put him in the garage or something? I am trying to eat." The casual cruelty in her voice was almost impressive. She spoke about me as if I were a wet dog that had wandered in from the rain. It wasn't just disgust. It was a deep-seated belief that I was beneath them, that a man like me didn't belong in a house like this unless he was serving the food or fixing the pipes. "He stays here," Hunter said, taking a seat and pouring himself a glass of wine. "We need him compliant. If we lock him outside, he might start howling and alert the neighbors." Mr. Wyatt chewed slowly, his eyes fixing on me with cold calculation. He swallowed and took a sip of wine. "This is a decent vintage Booker. I am surprised. I didn't take you for a man of taste." I said nothing. I just let my mouth hang open slightly, staring vacantly at the centerpiece. "Is he even in there?" Mrs. Wyatt asked, waving a fork in my direction. "He looks brain dead." "That is the point." Hunter laughed. He stood up and went to the kitchen. I heard the microwave beep. A minute later, he returned holding a plastic bowl. Steam rose from it, but it didn't smell like rosemary or steak. It smelled heavy and sweet, like overripe tomatoes masking something sharp. He placed the bowl on the edge of the table in front of me. No spoon, just the bowl. "Eat up, Pops," he said, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Tomato bisque, good for the bones. You need your strength if you are going to sign some papers for us later." I leaned forward. My stomach growled, betraying me. I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. The smell of the tomato soup was overpowering, but underneath the garlic and the basil there was a chemical tang, a metallic scent that pricked the back of my throat. I knew that smell. I grew up in neighborhoods where people didn't go to doctors for insomnia. They went to the corner man for a special mix, ketamine, or maybe a heavy dose of crushed benzodiazepines. It was a sloppy job. They had used too much. If I ate this, I wouldn't just sleep. I might never wake up. Or worse, I would wake up in a facility somewhere unable to speak, unable to think. My mind turned to mush while they sold my life piece by piece. I looked at the soup, then up at Hunter. He was watching me intently, a predator waiting for the trap to snap shut. "Eat," he commanded, his smile vanishing. I reached out my hand, trembling violently. I wasn't faking the tremor as much now. My blood sugar was low and the adrenaline was making my nerves fire uncontrollably. I grasped the plastic bowl. It was hot against my fingertips. I lifted it slowly, bringing it toward my face. I saw Hunter relax. I saw Mr. Wyatt go back to his steak. I waited until the bowl was inches from my lips, and then I let my thumb spasm. The bowl tipped. It wasn't a splash, it was a deluge. The thick red soup cascaded down my chin onto my shirt and all over the pristine hardwood floor. The plastic bowl clattered loudly as it hit the ground, spinning and spraying the last red drops against Hunter's polished shoes. "Oops," I mumbled, my voice thick. Slippery. The silence in the room was absolute. Then Hunter exploded. "You useless old idiot," he roared. He jumped up from the table, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He loomed over me, his face purple with rage. "That was my mother's recipe. Look at the mess!" Mrs. Wyatt shrieked, pulling her feet up. "He is doing it on purpose. He is an animal!" I shrank back in the chair, throwing my hands up to protect my face, cowering like a beaten dog. "I am sorry," I whined. "I am sorry. Hungry." Hunter grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head back. Pain shot down my neck, but I didn't fight it. I let him pull. "You are hungry," he hissed, spit flying into my face. "You want to eat. Then eat." He shoved my head down toward the floor, toward the puddle of red soup soaking into the wood. "Lick it up," he ordered. I froze. This was it, the line. A man has pride, a man has dignity. I had built skyscrapers, I had commanded crews of 200 men. I was Booker King. I did not eat off the floor. But then I thought of the shed. I thought of Aaliyah's cracked lips. I thought of the wet concrete in the backyard. If I fought him now, he would kill me. He was looking for a reason. He wanted me to snap so he could end it. I had to be smaller. I had to be nothing. Slowly, painfully, I lowered myself from the chair. My knees hit the hard wood with a crack. I bowed my head. I could feel their eyes on me. The disgust of the mother, the cold amusement of the father, the sadistic triumph of the son. I leaned forward and took a shallow breath. I made a slurping sound near the floor, not actually touching the mess, but close enough to sell the lie. "That is enough," Mr. Wyatt said, his voice bored. "Get him up, Hunter. He is ruining my appetite." Hunter kicked me in the ribs. Not hard enough to break them, but hard enough to bruise. "Get up," he spat. I scrambled back into the chair, clutching my side, tears of rage and humiliation stinging my eyes. I let them see the tears. They thought it was weakness. They didn't know it was fuel. "Now that we have established who is in charge," Mr. Wyatt said, wiping his mouth and pushing his plate away, "let us get to business." He reached into a leather briefcase that sat by his feet and pulled out a thick document. The paper was heavy official. He placed it on the table in front of me next to a gold fountain pen. "Hunter, clean him up," Mr. Wyatt said. "He can't sign with soup on his hands." Hunter grabbed a napkin and roughly wiped my hands, tossing the dirty linen onto the floor. "This is a simple formality, Booker," Mr. Wyatt said, his tone shifting to a smooth, professional cadence. "This document grants us temporary guardianship. It allows us to place you in a facility that can handle your decline. A very nice place. High-end. Best doctors in the state." He uncapped the pen and held it out to me. "Just sign at the bottom, then you can sleep." I looked at the paper. It wasn't a guardianship form. I could see the words power of attorney and transfer of deeds at the top. They weren't sending me to a home. They were taking everything. I reached for the pen. My hand shook so hard I couldn't hold it steady. "Help him, Hunter." Mr. Wyatt sighed. Hunter came around behind me and grabbed my right hand, forcing his fingers over mine, clamping them around the pen. He pressed my hand down onto the paper. "Sign it, old man," he whispered in my ear, "or the girl in the shed doesn't get water for another 2 days. The mention of Aaliyah sent a fresh shock of adrenaline through me. I couldn't sign. If I signed, I lost my leverage. I lost the house. I lost the ability to save her. I let Hunter guide my hand toward the signature line. The nib of the pen touched the paper. Ink began to flow. And then I locked my wrist. I stiffened every muscle in my forearm, turning my hand into a rigid claw. Hunter pushed, but I resisted, pushing back in the opposite direction. The pen dug into the paper, tearing through the fiber. "What are you doing?" Hunter grunted, pushing harder. I let out a low moan, a sound of confusion and distress. I jerked my hand violently. The gold nib of the expensive pen snagged deep into the document, and with a loud crack the pen snapped in half. Ink exploded over the paper, obliterating the text in a black Rorschach test. I pulled my hand away, holding up the broken pieces of the pen, my eyes wide with feigned panic. "Broken," I babbled. "Broken. Fix it." Hunter stared at the ruined document. The ink was spreading, soaking into the table runner. The veins in his neck bulged. "You senile piece of trash," he screamed. He didn't think. He just reacted. He swung his fist, a wild haymaker that caught me on the side of the head. It hurt. Lights popped in my vision, but I saw it coming. I rolled with the punch, turning my head so it glanced off my cheekbone rather than shattering my jaw. I threw myself backward, forcing the chair to tip over. I hit the floor with a heavy crash and went limp. I let my breath shallow out. I let my eyes roll back and then closed them. "He is out," Hunter shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "I think I killed him." Silence hung heavy in the room for a second. "Check his pulse," Mr. Wyatt said calmly. I felt fingers against my neck. I kept my breathing slow, controlled. My heart was racing, but there was nothing I could do about that. "He is alive," Hunter said, sounding disappointed. "Heart is beating fast." "Leave him," Mr. Wyatt said. "He is useless to us tonight. Drag him back to the room. We will get a notary here tomorrow. We will force his thumbprint if we have to." And the girl Mrs. Wyatt asked, "What if she starts screaming?" "She won't," Hunter replied. "I gave her something to keep her quiet. She is out cold." I lay there on the floor listening to every word. They thought I was unconscious. They thought I was beaten, broken, and defeated. "Drag him out, Hunter," Mr. Wyatt ordered. "I want to finish my wine." Hunter grabbed my ankles. He dragged me across the floor, my head bumping against the threshold. He hauled me down the hallway and threw me back into the dark room, slamming the door and locking it. I lay in the dark, listening to his footsteps retreat. My cheek throbbed. My ribs ached. I smelled of tomato soup and fear. But as I lay there in the silence, a cold smile touched my lips. They hadn't checked my pockets. While Hunter was wiping my hands while he was distracted by his own rage, I had palmed something from the table. I sat up and opened my hand. In the dim light filtering under the door, I saw the glint of metal. It was the steak knife Mr. Wyatt had been using. They wanted to play games. They wanted to treat me like an animal. Well, an animal with a knife is a dangerous thing. I stood up, ignoring the pain in my body. The window was still nailed shut. The door was locked. But now I had a tool, and I had a few hours before the alcohol they were drinking put them into a deep sleep. I walked to the window and wedged the knife blade under the frame. It was time to go to work. The darkness of the room was absolute, a heavy blanket that smelled of dust and my own dried blood. I lay on the floor for what felt like hours, listening to the sounds of the house settle. The heavy footsteps had stopped. The clinking of glasses had ceased. Now there was only the low hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic snoring of 3 people who had drunk too much expensive wine. I checked the glowing hands of my watch. It was 2 a.m, the witching hour, the time when old structures creak and settle and secrets are hardest to keep. My head throbbed where Hunter had punched me, a dull ache that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. My ribs felt like they were wrapped in barbed wire every time I took a breath. I was 68 years old and I had spent the night on a hardwood floor after being beaten by my son-in-law. My joints were stiff, my muscles seized tight with tension. But as I pushed myself up to a sitting position, I felt a strange clarity. The pain was good. The pain was a reminder that I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, I was dangerous. I crawled to the window. The steak knife I had stolen was still wedged in the frame where I had left it hours ago. I gripped the handle, my hands steady now. I worked the blade back and forth, digging into the layers of paint that had sealed the window shut for years. Paint flaked away, sticking to my sweaty skin. I pushed the blade deeper, finding the leverage point between the sash and the sill. I leaned my weight into it. Wood groaned. It was a soft sound, but in the silence of the night it sounded like a gunshot. I froze, holding my breath, listening. The snoring continued, uninterrupted. I pushed again, harder this time. With a sudden pop, the seal broke. I slid the window up. It moved only a few inches before sticking, but it was enough. The night air rushed in, humid and sweet, carrying the scent of rain and wet earth. It was the smell of freedom. I squeezed my body through the narrow opening. My shoulders scraped against the frame, the rough wood tearing my shirt. I wriggled my hips through, forcing my old bones to bend in ways they hadn't in 20 years. I hung by my fingertips from the sill, my feet dangling in the darkness. It was only a 4-foot drop to the flower bed below, but to my knees it might as well have been a mile. I let go. I hit the soft earth with a heavy thud. Pain shot up my legs, exploding in my bad knee, the one I had injured building the stadium downtown back in '95. I bit my tongue to keep from crying out, tasting fresh copper in my mouth. I stayed crouched in the azalea bushes, waiting for a light to flick on, waiting for Hunter to come charging out with that bat. But the house remained dark. They were confident. They were arrogant. They thought the old man was broken and locked away. I forced myself to stand. My knee buckled, but I locked it straight, leaning my weight against the brick wall of the house. I took a deep breath, pushing the pain into a small box in the back of my mind. I would deal with it later. Right now, I had a job to do. I moved through the shadows, skirting the edge of the property line. The grass was wet with dew soaking through my socks. I scanned the yard, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. I saw the glint of metal near the patio. It was my crowbar lying exactly where I had dropped it when I decided to play the part of the senile fool. I picked it up. The iron was cold and heavy, familiar in my grip. It felt like an extension of my arm. I approached the shed. The silence in the backyard was heavy, oppressive. It felt like a graveyard, which I suppose in a way it was. I looked toward the pool, the fresh slab of concrete glowing faintly in the moonlight. I forced my eyes away. Not yet. I reached the shed door. The shiny new padlock glinted, mocking me. I didn't waste time trying to pry the hasp this time. I jammed the curved end of the crowbar into the loop of the lock itself. I braced my shoulder against the door and torqued the bar, using the wood as a fulcrum. Metal ground against metal, a high-pitched screech that made my teeth ache. I pushed harder, channeling every ounce of my rage into my arms. With a loud crack, the internal mechanism of the lock shattered. The shackle popped open. I pulled the chain free and threw the door open. "Aaliyah," I whispered into the darkness. "Baby girl, it is me." There was no movement, no sound. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight, shielding the beam with my hand. She was where I had left her, curled in the corner. But she wasn't moving. Her skin was gray, her breathing shallow and ragged. I knelt beside her, ignoring the screaming protest of my knees. I touched her cheek. She was burning up. "Aaliyah," I said, shaking her gently. "We have to go." Her eyes fluttered open, but they were glassy, unfocused. The drugs Hunter had mentioned, the ones he used to keep her quiet, were strong. She looked at me, but I wasn't sure she saw me. "Daddy," she mumbled, her voice thick and slurred. The water is heavy." I didn't know what she meant, and I didn't have time to ask. I slid my arms under her back and knees. She was a grown woman, but she felt light, wasted away by days of dehydration and terror. I lifted her. My back screamed in protest, a sharp line of fire running down my spine. I gritted my teeth and stood up, swaying under her weight. I carried her out of the shed. I couldn't go back through the house. The gate was locked and the code was changed. But I knew this property better than anyone. I had built the perimeter fence myself. I knew that the third post from the corner on the east side had a rod issue near the bottom that I had been meaning to fix for months. I made my way to the fence line, carrying my daughter like a precious, fragile bundle. I found the loose post. I set Aaliyah down gently on the grass and kicked the wood. It gave way, creating a gap just wide enough for a person. I dragged her through the opening, pulling her onto the sidewalk of the side street. My truck was parked 2 blocks away, hidden under the oak tree. The walk felt like a marathon. Every step was a battle against gravity and exhaustion. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I kept expecting to hear a shout behind me, to hear running footsteps, to feel a bullet or a bat. But the night remained quiet. I reached the truck. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them twice. I finally got the door open and slid Aaliyah onto the bench seat. She groaned as her head lolled back against the fabric. I ran around to the driver's side and climbed in. I started the engine. The old Ford roared to life, a sound that usually comforted me but now sounded like a siren announcing my escape. I put it in gear and drove away, leaving my house, my life, and the monsters inside it behind in the rearview mirror. I drove for 10 minutes, putting distance between us and the Wyatts. I kept checking the mirrors, paranoid that red sports car would appear behind me, headlights blazing. But the streets were empty. When I was sure we weren't being followed, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station. I needed water. I bought 3 large bottles and ran back to the truck. I lifted Aaliyah's head and tipped the bottle to her lips. She drank greedily, coughing and sputtering, water running down her chin. The water seemed to revive her slightly. Her eyes cleared a fraction. She looked at me, and this time she really saw me. "Daddy," she whispered, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "You came back." "I promised I would," I said, smoothing her hair back from her sweaty forehead. "I got you, baby. You are safe." "No," she said, shaking her head, her eyes wide with a sudden, lucid terror. "We aren't safe. You don't know what he did. You don't know why." "I know he killed someone," I said softly. "You told me. In the shed." She pulled me closer, her voice dropping to a frantic hiss. "It wasn't just a partner, Daddy. It was Mike. You remember Mike? The guy who got him into the crypto scheme. Hunter owed him $200,000. Mike came to the house. He said he was going to take the house if Hunter didn't pay. I listened, my blood turning to ice. 200,000. My house was worth 4 times that. Hunter laughed at him, she continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He told Mike the house wasn't his to take. He said it was yours. And then Mike said he would go to you. He said he would tell you everything about the stolen money, about the fraud." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "That is when Hunter hit him. He used the shovel from the garden. I saw it, Daddy. I was in the kitchen. I saw his head." She choked on a sob. I squeezed her hand, urging her to continue. I needed to know everything. "He fell into the empty pool," she whispered. "He was still moving, Daddy. He was trying to crawl out. Hunter didn't help him. He just stood there watching. And then he called the cement truck. He told the driver it was an emergency rush job for a foundation repair. He paid him cash, triple the rate. They poured it right over him. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. Buried alive. Or close enough. The cruelty was unimaginable. And then Aaliyah said, her voice trembling. "Hunter grabbed me. He said if I ever told anyone, I would go in the pool next. He said he was going to keep me until you came back. He needed you to sign the house over. He said once he had the deed, he could sell it to pay off the debt and get rid of the evidence all at once. He wants to sell the house with the body in the backyard," I asked, horrified. "He doesn't care," she said. "He just needs the money. He said he would be in Mexico before anyone ever dug up that pool." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. We have to go to the police, Daddy. We have to tell them. We will, I said, starting the truck again. But not yet. Why not, she cried. Because it is his word against ours, I said, shifting the truck into drive. He will say Mike left. He will say you are crazy on drugs. He will say I am a senile old man who kidnapped you. If the police go there and don't find a body immediately, if they need a warrant, if they hesitate, Hunter will run. Or worse, he will destroy the evidence. He will find a way to spin this. He has his parents there to back him up. So what do we do, she asked. We get proof, I said, my voice hard. Undeniable proof. We catch him. I drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, a place with flickering neon signs and no questions asked. I paid cash for a room on the ground floor. I helped Aaliyah inside and got her settled on the bed. She was exhausted, the adrenaline fading, leaving her trembling and weak. Lock the door, I told her. Put the chair under the handle. Do not open it for anyone but me. Where are you going? She asked, panic rising in her voice. I have to make a call, I said. And then I have to go back. Back, she screamed. Are you crazy? He will kill you. No, he won't, I said. He thinks I am a confused old man who wandered off. He doesn't know I have you. He doesn't know what I know. I stepped outside into the cool night air. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical precision. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Harrison answered on the second ring. His voice was gravelly rough with sleep. Booker, it is 3 a.m. This better be good. Harrison was a lawyer, but before that he had been a combat engineer in the same unit as me in Vietnam. We had cleared minefields together. We had built bridges under fire. He knew about structure and he knew about destroying things. I need you to wake up Harrison, I said. I need to initiate the Tomb Protocol. There was a silence on the line. The Tomb Protocol was a joke we had made years ago, a contingency plan for a worst-case scenario where we had to burn everything down to save ourselves. It meant legal scorched earth. Talk to me, Booker Harrison said, his voice suddenly sharp and alert. My son-in-law buried a man in my swimming pool, I said. He has my daughter's power of attorney. He is trying to sell my house, and he tried to kill me tonight. I heard the sound of a lamp clicking on the rustle of sheets. I am listening, Harrison said. I need paperwork, I said. I need a fake deed transfer. I need a foreclosure notice. I need something that looks official enough to make a desperate man panic. I need to flush him out. I need him to dig. Dig? Harrison asked. Yeah, I said, looking at the distant glow of the city lights. I need him to dig up that pool himself. I need him to show the world what he did. I can have the papers ready by sunrise, Harrison said. What is your play? I am going back in, I said. Booker Harrison warned. That is suicide. If he knows you are onto him, he doesn't. I cut in. To him, I am just a loose end. A senile old fool. I am going to use that. I am going to be the ghost in his house. I hung up. I looked back at the motel room door where my daughter was safe for now. I had saved her. That was the first part of the mission. Now came the demolition. I wasn't running away. I was going back to the house I built. I was going back to face the monster in my kitchen. And I was going to make sure that when he fell hard enough to shatter into a million pieces. I climbed back into my truck. My knee throbbed, my head ached, but I felt strong. I was a builder. I knew how things worked. And I knew that every structure, no matter how imposing, has a critical weakness. Hunter's weakness was his greed, and I was going to use it to bury him. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the boarded-up window, painting lines of dust in the stagnant air of the bedroom. I was back on the filthy mattress, exactly where Hunter had left me the night before. My body screamed in protest. My bad knee throbbed with a dull, persistent ache from the jump out of the window and the long walk back from the motel. My ribs felt like they were wrapped in hot wire, but I lay still. I forced my breathing to be shallow and rhythmic. I had to become the furniture. I had to become the ghost in my own home. I had slipped back into the house an hour before dawn. It had been a risk. The front door was locked, but the kitchen window, the one with the faulty latch that I had been meaning to fix for 6 months, was my way in. I had crept through the silent house, past the snoring forms of Hunter's parents on the living room couches, and back into this prison cell. I had wedged the window shut again, jamming the paint back into the cracks to hide my escape. I had curled up on the mattress and waited. Now the heavy sound of the barricade being dragged away from the door echoed in the hallway. The chair scraped against the wood floor. The lock clicked. The doorknob turned. Hunter stood in the doorway. He looked terrible. His skin was pale and waxy, his eyes bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. He was wearing the same clothes as the night before, stained with wine and sweat. He reeked of a hangover that was fighting a losing battle against his desperation. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He had expected to find a body, or at least a man in a coma. He had drugged that soup with enough ketamine to knock out a horse. He had seen me lick it off the floor. In his mind, I should have been a vegetable. But there I was. I lifted my head slowly, letting it wobble on my neck. I blinked at him, my eyes unfocused and watery. I let a line of drool escape the corner of my mouth. Hunter frowned. He took a step into the room, looking around suspiciously. He looked at the soup bowl still lying on the floor where it had fallen. He looked at the empty space where the soup had been. "You are awake," he muttered. His voice was raspy. "How are you awake?" I didn't answer. I just groaned and rolled onto my side, pulling my knees up to my chest. Hunter walked over to the window. He grabbed the frame and tried to lift it. It held fast, stuck tight by the years of paint and my handiwork with the steak knife, which was now safely hidden in my shoe. He checked the glass. It was unbroken. He turned back to me, confusion warring with relief on his face. "Maybe I didn't use enough," he whispered to himself. "Or maybe the old man has a tolerance." He kicked the mattress. "Hey, wake up." I flinched, exaggerating the movement. I looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Where is Aaliyah?" Hunter let out a breath he had been holding. He ran a hand through his greasy hair. "He is still out of it," he said to himself. "Good. That is good." He looked at me with a mixture of disgust and calculation. He didn't know how I was awake, but he didn't have time to question it. He had a deadline, he had a buyer coming, and he needed the prop for his play. "Get up, Booker," he snapped. "We have a big day." He reached down and grabbed my arm, hauling me to my feet. I let my legs go rubbery, forcing him to take my weight. I leaned against him, letting my unwashed smell assault his delicate senses. He gagged slightly and pushed me toward the door. "Into the bathroom," he ordered. "You smell like a sewer." He marched me down the hall. The house was a hive of activity. Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt were up, moving with frantic energy. They were cleaning. Wine bottles were being shoved into trash bags. Pizza boxes were being crushed. Mrs. Wyatt was spraying air freshener in thick clouds, trying to mask the scent of stale alcohol and the underlying smell of wet concrete from the backyard. They ignored me as Hunter dragged me into the guest bathroom. He didn't be gentle. He turned the shower on cold and shoved me under the spray clothes and all. The shock of the freezing water took my breath away. I gasped and sputtered, flailing my arms like a drowning man. "Stand still," he shouted, grabbing a bottle of cheap shampoo and squirting it over my head. He scrubbed my scalp roughly, his fingernails scratching my skin. It wasn't a bath, it was a decontamination. He wanted to wash away the evidence of his neglect, not to make me comfortable, but to make me presentable. He turned the water off and threw a rough towel at my face. "Dry off. And do it fast." I fumbled with the towel, my hands shaking violently. I wasn't just acting now, the cold had seeped into my bones. I stripped off my wet clothes, standing naked and shivering in front of the man who had tried to kill me. He looked at my scarred body, the map of a life spent building things, with a sneer of contempt. "Put this on," he said, kicking a pile of clothes toward me. It was my old Sunday suit, the one I wore to church. It smelled of mothballs and cedar. I put it on, slowly buttoning the shirt wrong on purpose, missing loops, fumbling with the zipper. Hunter watched me, impatiently tapping his foot. "Fix your collar," he barked. "You look like a hobo." He stepped forward and jerked my collar straight, tightening the tie until it choked me. He grabbed my shoulders and spun me around, forcing me to look in the mirror. "Look at you," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "The respected Booker King, look at what you have become." I stared at my reflection. The man in the mirror looked broken. His eyes were hollow, his skin gray, but deep in the pupil, behind the veneer of senility, I saw the spark. The engineer was still there, assessing the load, calculating the stress points, waiting for the collapse. "Listen to me, old man," Hunter said, leaning close, his face next to mine in the mirror. "In 1 hour, a man is coming to look at the house. He is going to buy it. And you are going to help me sell it." I blinked at him, letting my mouth hang slack. "Sell," I mumbled. "Home." "Yes, sell," he hissed. "And here is what you are going to do. You are going to sit in the living room, you are going to smile, you are going to nod. And if he asks you anything, you are going to say that you are happy to be moving to a retirement community. Do you understand? I shook my head slowly, feigning confusion. Aaliyah, I whined. I want Aaliyah. Hunter's grip on my shoulders tightened until I thought my collarbone would snap. Aaliyah is safe, he lied, his eyes boring into mine. She is perfectly safe, but she is in my custody. Do you understand what that means, Booker? It means I decide what happens to her. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. He didn't know she was gone. He didn't know she was safe in a motel room with a chair wedged under the door. He thought he still held the ace, and I had to let him believe it. If you mess this up, Hunter whispered, if you say one wrong word to the buyer, if you act crazy or try to ask for help, I will make a call. And Aaliyah won't get water today, or tomorrow, or ever again. Do you hear me? I let a tear leak out of my eye. I let my lip tremble. Please, I whispered, don't hurt her. Then be a good boy, he said, patting my cheek with a mock affection that was more terrifying than his rage. Be a good boy and sign the papers when I tell you to. And maybe, just maybe, I will let you see her again. He spun me around and marched me out of the bathroom. The living room had been transformed. The trash was gone. The curtains were open, letting in the bright morning sun. Mrs. Wyatt had arranged a vase of fresh flowers on the coffee table. Mr. Wyatt was sitting in my armchair reading a newspaper, looking like the picture of a concerned grandfather. It was a stage set, a facade of normalcy built over a foundation of rot. Hunter pushed me toward the sofa. Sit here, he commanded. And don't move. I sat. The cushions were soft, swallowing me up. I rested my hands on my knees, keeping them trembling. I looked around the room with wide, frightened eyes, playing the part of the confused elder, overwhelmed by the activity. Hunter paced back and forth, checking his watch. He was nervous. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. He kept glancing out the window toward the street. He needed this money. He needed it fast. He was a man running out of time, and he was making mistakes. I felt the weight of the burner phone in my sock. I had bought it at the gas station when I got the water for Aaliyah. It was a cheap plastic brick, but it had a voice recorder and a battery that would last for days. I had slipped it into my sock while I was in the bathroom fumbling with my pants. Now I needed to move it. I needed to get it into a position where it would capture every word of the transaction. The sofa was perfect. The cushions were deep and separated by a narrow crevice that would hide the phone but allow the microphone to pick up the conversation in the room. But Hunter was watching me like a hawk. I need water, I croaked, clutching my throat. Thirsty. Hunter rolled his eyes. Mom, get him a glass of water before he dries up and blows away. Mrs. Wyatt sighed loudly from the kitchen, but she started running the tap. Hunter turned his back to me, walking toward the window to check for the buyer again. This was my chance. I slumped sideways on the sofa, letting out a groan as if my old back had given out. I jammed my hand down toward my ankle. My fingers brushed the rough fabric of my sock. I gripped the phone. What are you doing? Hunter snapped, spinning around. I froze my hand halfway up my leg. My leg, I whined, rubbing my knee. It hurts. Arthritis. Hunter narrowed his eyes. Sit up straight. You look like a sack of potatoes. I pulled myself up slowly, keeping the phone palm hidden against my thigh. I rubbed my knee with my other hand, putting on a show of pain. Hunter watched me for a second longer, then turned back to the window as a car engine sounded in the driveway. He is here, Hunter said, his voice tight. Showtime, everyone. Mrs. Wyatt came in with the water. She thrust the glass at me. Here, drink it and shut up. I took the glass with both hands, letting it rattle against my teeth as I drank. Hunter walked to the front door, smoothing his hair, fixing his tie. He took a deep breath, composing himself, transforming from the abuser into the grieving son-in-law. Remember Booker, he hissed over his shoulder without looking at me. One wrong word. The doorbell rang. It was a cheerful, innocent sound that echoed through the house of horrors. Hunter opened the door. A large man in a cheap suit stepped in, booming a greeting. I took the opportunity. While all eyes were on the door, while the loud greetings filled the air, I slid my hand between the sofa cushions. I pushed the phone deep down into the gap, angling it so the microphone faced out. I pulled my hand back and rested it on my knee just as Hunter turned around, ushering the buyer into the room. I sat there, a small, trembling old man in an ill-fitting suit. But inside I was calm. The trap was set. The recorder was rolling. Now all I had to do was wait for them to hang themselves, and I knew exactly how much rope to give them. The man who walked through my front door was not a home buyer. He was a vulture in a polyester suit. His name was Eddie, and he smelled of cheap cologne and opportunism. He didn't look at the crown molding I had installed by hand. He didn't admire the hardwood floors or the structural integrity of the beams. He looked at the house the way a butcher looks at a carcass, calculating how much meat he could strip off the bone. Hunter introduced him as an investor, a friend of a friend. I sat on the sofa, my hands trembling on my knees, my eyes wide and vacant, playing the part of the confused geriatric to perfection. I watched Eddie walk around the living room, kicking the baseboards with his scuffed dress shoes. "This place is a gut job," Eddie announced loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "The wiring is probably shot. The layout is ancient. Nobody wants these closed floor plans anymore. It is going to cost me 50 grand just to open up the kitchen." I felt a surge of indignation. The wiring in this house was military grade. The layout was timeless. But I kept my mouth shut, letting my head bobble slightly. Hunter stood by the fireplace, wringing his hands. He was sweating through his shirt. "So what are we thinking?" Eddie Hunter asked, his voice tight with desperation. "We are looking for a quick close. Cash." Eddie laughed, a harsh barking sound. He walked over to the window and looked out at the street. "Zillow says 850, but Zillow does not know this place smells like old people in desperation. I will give you 400. Cash. Today." 400. Hunter choked. "That is less than half. The land alone is worth more than that." Eddie shrugged, adjusting his tie. "Take it or leave it, kid. I am doing you a favor. I know you need to move fast. I can have the money in your account by noon, or you can list it, go through inspections, wait for a bank loan. Your call." Hunter looked at his parents. Mr. Wyatt was stone-faced, but his eyes were screaming, "Take the money." Mrs. Wyatt was picking lint off her skirt, looking bored. They didn't care about the equity. They didn't care that this was my life savings, my legacy for Aaliyah. They just wanted the cash so they could run before the bodies were found. Hunter turned back to Eddie. He looked like he was about to vomit. 400 is robbery," he muttered. "You are in no position to negotiate," Eddie said, stepping closer, invading Hunter's space. "I know about the debts, Hunter. I know about the people looking for you. 400,000 gets you a plane ticket and a fresh start." Hunter closed his eyes. I could see the fight leave him. He was a coward, and cowards always take the easy way out, even if it costs them everything. "Fine," he whispered. 400. But we close today." "Done," Eddie said, extending a hand. "Let us take a look at the grounds, and then we will sign the papers." My heart hammered against my ribs. $400,000. He was selling my life's work for scrap. If they signed those papers, if the money transferred, I would lose the house. I would lose my leverage. I had to stop this. But I couldn't break character. I couldn't stand up and shout. I had to be smarter. I had to use their own greed against them. We stood up. Hunter grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "Come on, Booker," he hissed. "We are going outside. Don't say a word." We walked through the kitchen and out the back door onto the patio. The heat of the day hit us instantly. The backyard was a mess of overgrown grass and neglect, but dominating the space was the fresh gray scar of the concrete-filled pool. Eddie stopped dead on the patio. He whistled low and long. "What in the hell is that?" he asked, pointing a thick finger at the slab. Hunter stiffened. I felt his grip on my arm tighten until it was painful. "It is a patio extension," he lied quickly. "We filled in the pool. Too much maintenance. We are going to put a basketball court there." Eddie walked off the porch and onto the grass. He circled the concrete, kicking at the wooden forms that were still holding the wet edges in place. "That is a lot of concrete for a basketball court," he said, suspicious. "That is 5 feet thick if it is an inch. Why didn't you just deck over it?" Hunter stammered, searching for a lie. "Structural stability. The ground was shifting. We wanted it solid." I watched them. I saw Eddie's eyes narrow. He knew something was wrong. He was a shark, and he smelled blood in the water. He just didn't know what kind of blood it was. I let out a low moan, a sound of senile confusion. I pulled my arm away from Hunter and took a stumbling step toward the pool. "Not a court." I mumbled, my voice loud and clear in the quiet yard. "Not for ball." Hunter lunged for me, but I sidestepped, using my cane to block him. I pointed a shaking finger at the center of the concrete slab, right where I knew the deep end used to be, right where Aaliyah said the body was. "The vault," I said, my eyes wide with a fake lucidity. That is where he put the vault. Eddie turned to look at me. What did he say? Hunter grabbed my shoulder. Shut up, old man. He is confused. He doesn't know what he is talking about. I shook him off with a strength that surprised him. My grandpa's gold. I continued, raising my voice. From the mines in Africa. He said the banks weren't safe. He said bury it deep, Booker. Bury it in concrete so the government can't find it. I saw the change in Eddie's face instantly. The suspicion vanished, replaced by a naked, hungry greed. He looked from me to the concrete and back again. Gold, he asked, his voice dropping an octave. What is he talking about, Hunter? He is crazy, Hunter shouted, his face turning red. There is no gold. He is senile. He thinks he is a pirate. But I kept going, weaving the lie with threads of truth. The bars, I whispered, staring at the concrete as if I could see through it. 50 of them. Pure bullion. Saved from the war. He told me to pour the concrete thick. He told me to hide it forever. I looked at Eddie and gave him a conspiratorial wink. Don't tell the tax man, I whispered. It is our secret. Eddie looked at the slab differently now. He wasn't seeing a filled-in pool. He was seeing a treasure chest. He walked to the center of the concrete and stamped his foot. It sounded solid heavy. 50 bars, he murmured, doing the math in his head. That is millions. Hunter was panicking. I could smell it on him. He wasn't thinking about gold. He was thinking about the body rotting a few feet beneath Eddie's shoes. If Eddie believed me, if he demanded to dig, he wouldn't find treasure. He would find a corpse. And Hunter would go to prison for life. This is nonsense, Hunter said, his voice high and shrill. He is off his meds. We are leaving. Eddie didn't move. He stood on the concrete, his hands on his hips. You know, Hunter, he said slowly, if there is gold down here, that changes the valuation. There is no gold, Hunter screamed. Then you won't mind if we check. Eddie said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Before I hand over 400 grand, I want to know what I am buying. Tell you what, I will pay for the jackhammer. We drill a test hole. If there is nothing there, I buy the house as is. If there is gold, we split it 50-50. It was the perfect trap. Eddie's greed was pushing him to dig. Hunter's fear was pushing him to run. And I was the one pulling the strings. Hunter stepped between Eddie and the pool. His hands were shaking. He looked like a cornered animal. Get off my property, he said. Eddie laughed. Relax, kid. I am making you a fair offer. I said, get out, Hunter roared. The deal is off. No sale. Get off my land before I call the cops. Eddie's smile faded. He looked at Hunter, then at the concrete, then at me. He saw the terror in Hunter's eyes. He didn't see a man protecting a treasure. He saw a man hiding a secret. But Eddie was a con man, not a detective. He assumed the secret was money, not murder. You are making a mistake, kid, Eddie said, his voice low and threatening. You don't walk away from a deal with me. I am not selling, Hunter shouted, pushing Eddie toward the gate. Get out! Eddie held his hands up, backing away. All right. You want to sit on your gold mine, fine, but don't come crawling back to me when the loan sharks come knocking. Eddie walked to the side gate and let himself out, slamming it behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Silence descended on the backyard. The birds were singing, the sun was shining, but the air was thick with tension. Hunter stood in the middle of the yard, his chest heaving. He stared at the gate, then turned slowly to look at the concrete slab. Mr. Wyatt walked down from the porch. You idiot, he hissed. You just blew the only deal we had. Where are we going to get the money now? Hunter didn't answer. He was staring at the concrete. I watched his face. I saw the fear receding, replaced by something else. Something I had planted there. He looked at me. I was standing by those rose bushes, looking vacant, humming a little tune. Is it true, he whispered. I didn't answer. I just bent down and plucked a weed from the garden. Is it true, old man, he shouted, marching over to me and grabbing my lapels. Is there gold in that pool? I looked at him, blinking. Gold, I asked innocently. Grandpa said to hide it. He said concrete is better than a bank. Safe. Keep it safe for Aaliyah. Hunter let go of me. He stepped back, running a hand over his mouth. He looked at his father. Dad, he said, his voice trembling. What if he is telling the truth? Mr. Wyatt scoffed. He is senile, Hunter. He is making it up. He was an engineer, Hunter argued. He worked overseas for 30 years. Africa, the Middle East. He made good money, and he never spent any of it. Look at this house. Look at his truck. He lived like a pauper. Where did the money go? He turned back to the pool. His eyes were wide manic. He wasn't seeing a grave anymore. He was seeing his salvation. He was seeing the solution to all his problems buried right there in his own backyard. The fear of the body was still there, but the greed was louder. The greed was screaming. "If there is gold down there," Hunter whispered, "we don't need to sell the house. We don't need Eddie. We take the gold, we pay off Mike's people, and we disappear." "But the body," Mr. Wyatt whispered, looking around nervously. "We dig carefully," Hunter said, his voice gaining confidence. "We find the gold first, then we worry about the rest." He looked at me again. A slow, twisted smile spread across his face. "You are going to help us, Booker," he said. "You are going to show us exactly where it is." I smiled back, a vacant, empty smile, but inside I was cheering. He had taken the bait. He was going to dig. He was going to do my work for me. "Get the shovels," Hunter barked at his father. "Get the pickaxes. We are going mining." I sat down on the grass and watched them scramble. They were no longer a family. They were a pack of hyenas fighting over a carcass, and they were about to dig their own prison cells. The first crack in the concrete would be the beginning of the end, and I would be there to watch it crumble. The zip ties bit into my wrists, cutting off the circulation to my hands. I sat bound to one of my own kitchen chairs, the wood hard against my spine. My kitchen, the heart of my home, had been transformed into a torture chamber. The smell of stale pizza and fear hung heavy in the air. Hunter stood in front of me holding a paring knife, the blade catching the light from the overhead fixture. It was a small knife, one I used to peel apples for Aaliyah when she was little, but in Hunter's shaking hand it looked like a butcher's cleaver. "Where is it, old man?" Hunter hissed. He leaned in close, his face a mask of sweat and desperation. "Where exactly is the gold?" I looked past him to his parents. Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt were leaning against the granite island, watching the scene with a disturbing intensity. They were not horrified. They were not trying to stop their son. They were cheering him on. Their eyes were wide and hungry, fixed on me like vultures waiting for the carcass to open up. "Make him talk." "Hunter," Mrs. Wyatt said, her voice shrill and impatient, "we do not have time for games. If he does not speak, cut him." "That is right," Mr. Wyatt added, taking a sip from a glass of my scotch. "A finger is a small price to pay for a fortune. Show him you mean business, son." I looked at these people, these suburban grandparents who drove a beige sedan and went to church on Sundays. Underneath the veneer of civility, they were monsters. Greed had stripped away their humanity, leaving only a raw animal hunger. They were willing to watch me bleed, willing to watch me be maimed just for the chance to steal a retirement they had not earned. Hunter grabbed my left hand. He slammed it down onto the kitchen table. He pressed the blade of the knife against my pinky finger. The metal was cold against my skin. I felt a line of pain as he applied pressure, not enough to cut through yet, but enough to draw a bead of blood. "I am not asking again," Hunter growled. "You tell me the exact location or you lose this finger. And then the next one. And the next one. I will whittle you down until there is nothing left but a stump and a voice." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not an act anymore. The fear was real. Hunter was unstable, fueled by adrenaline and the crushing weight of his debts. One slip of his hand, one spasm of rage, and I would be maimed for life. But I knew I could not break character completely. If I became too lucid too suddenly, they might realize I had been playing them all along. I had to thread the needle between a terrified old man and a truthful confessor. I let out a high, thin wail of pain and terror. I tried to pull my hand back, but Hunter's grip was iron. "Please," I cried, tears leaking from my eyes. "Please do not cut me. I will tell you. I will tell you everything." Hunter eased the pressure on the knife, just a fraction. "Talk," he commanded. "And do not lie to me, Booker. I will know." I took a shuddering breath, letting my head loll back. I looked at the ceiling as if searching for a memory in the fog of my mind. "Africa," I whispered. It was back in the 80s. I was working on the dam project in Lagos. The currency was crashing. The government could not pay us in dollars. They paid us in bullion. Gold bars. Mr. Wyatt asked, stepping forward, his drink forgotten. "Yes," I said, nodding frantically. "Pure gold. 50 bars. I brought them back in my tool crates, smuggled them past customs. Why bury it?" Hunter asked, pressing the knife down again. "Why not put it in a safety deposit box?" The IRSI blurted out, my eyes darting around the room. They were watching me. They audited the firm. If they found the gold, they would take it all. I had to hide it. I had to put it somewhere they would never look. Somewhere permanent. I paused, letting the story sink in. I saw the greed blooming on their faces, replacing the cruelty. They were hooked. Now I had to reel them in with the details. I had to use my authority as an engineer to make the lie unbreakable. I poured the pool myself, I said, my voice gaining a bit of strength, a bit of technical precision. I designed a false bottom, reinforced concrete, 5,000 psi. I laid a grid of rebar over the box to scramble metal detectors. You cannot scan for it. You have to know where it is. Where is it? Mrs. Wyatt demanded, pushing off the counter and coming to stand right next to me. The deep end, I said. 3 feet from the main drain. I buried the box first. It is lead-lined to stop radiation scanners. Then I poured 2 feet of concrete over it. Then I built the pool shell on top. It is deep, Hunter. You have to go deep. Hunter pulled the knife away from my finger. He looked at the blade, seeing the smear of my blood, and then he wiped it on his pants. He looked at his parents. A slow, manic grin spread across his face. Lead-lined, he whispered. Reinforced concrete. That is why nobody ever found it. That is why he lives like a pauper. He is sitting on a dragon's hoard. 50 bars. Mr. Wyatt did the math aloud, his voice trembling. At current market prices, that is over $3 million. Maybe 4. Hunter laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. We are rich, he shouted, throwing his arms up. We are filthy rich. He turned back to me, his eyes shining with a feverish light. He grabbed my face, squeezing my cheeks until my teeth hurt. You old miser, he said. You were holding out on us. You let us struggle while you had millions buried in the backyard. I did not answer. I just trembled, letting my eyes drift shut as if the effort of the confession had exhausted me. But inside I was calculating. I had given them the bait, I had given them a target, and I had given them a reason to ignore the one thing that should have stopped them, the body. Hunter seemed to have completely forgotten about Mike, the man he had murdered and buried in that same concrete. The promise of gold had wiped his memory clean. The fear of prison was gone, replaced by the intoxication of instant wealth. He was not thinking about evidence anymore. He was thinking about Ferraris and penthouses. We need to dig, Mr. Wyatt said, his voice urgent. We need to get it out now, before anyone else comes sniffing around. Hunter nodded vigorously. Yes. We dig. Tonight. He looked at me. You are going to show us exactly where Booker. You are going to point to the spot. I nodded weakly. Yes, I will show you. Just do not hurt me. He won't hurt you, Mom. Mrs. Wyatt said, her tone suddenly changing from vicious to dismissive. Not if you make us rich. Hunter cut the zip ties on my wrists. The plastic snapped and blood rushed back into my hands painfully. I rubbed my wrists, keeping my head down. Get up, Hunter ordered. We have work to do. He pulled me out of the chair. I stumbled, leaning on the table for support. They didn't care about my condition. They only cared that I was conscious enough to point a finger. Hunter ran to the back door and threw it open. The heat of the afternoon had faded, but the air was still heavy and humid. He looked out at the concrete slab, his eyes devouring it. He wasn't seeing a crime scene. He was seeing a bank vault. He turned back to his father. Dad, get the tools from the garage. Sledgehammers, pickaxes, everything you can find. We need something bigger, Mr. Wyatt said. That is reinforced concrete, Hunter. A pickaxe won't scratch it. Hunter paced the kitchen, his hands in his hair. You are right. We need a jackhammer. We need heavy equipment. We can't rent a jackhammer, Mrs. Wyatt hissed. It is too loud. The neighbors will call the police. Let them call, Hunter shouted. By the time they get here, we will be gone. We will have the gold, and we will be halfway to Mexico. He was spiraling. The logic centers of his brain had shut down. He was operating on pure greed and adrenaline. This was exactly what I wanted. A rational man would stop. A rational man would worry about the noise, the neighbors, the dead body. But Hunter was not rational. He was an addict, and gold was his new drug. He grabbed his phone. I know a guy, he said, his fingers flying across the screen, a contractor who owes me a favor. He has an electric breaker. It is quieter than the pneumatic ones. I will get him to drop it off. No witnesses, Mr. Wyatt warned. He won't come in, Hunter said. He will leave it in the driveway. I will tell him I'm doing a renovation. He made the call, barking orders into the phone, his voice high and tight. He paced back and forth, stepping over the spot where I had licked up the soup. He didn't even see me anymore. I was just a map to him now. I stood by the counter, nursing my throbbing finger. I watched them. They were in a frenzy. Mr. Wyatt was already heading to the garage. Mrs. Wyatt was pouring herself another drink, her hands shaking with excitement. They had swallowed the lie whole. They had swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. They were going to tear up their own cover-up. They were going to exhume the evidence of their own crime, and they were going to do it with a smile on their faces, thinking they were digging for treasure. I felt a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. It was a dangerous game I was playing. If they dug and found the body before the police arrived, if they realized there was no gold while they still held the weapons, they would kill me instantly. I had to time this perfectly. Hunter hung up the phone. "It is on the way," he said, breathless. 1 hour. He turned to me. "You better be right, old man. If we dig down there and find nothing but dirt, I will bury you in that hole myself." I nodded, looking at the floor. "It is there," I mumbled. "I promise." 50 bars, Good Hunter said. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and chugged it down, water spilling onto his shirt. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Let us get the area prepped," he said to his mother. "Move the patio furniture. Clear the deck. We need room to work." They bustled out the back door, leaving me alone in the kitchen for a split second. I looked at the knife block. I looked at the back door. I could run. I could try to make it to the fence again. But I didn't move. Running wouldn't end this. Running would just make me a fugitive, a victim. I needed to finish it. I needed to see the look on Hunter's face when he pulled that body out of the ground. I needed to see his world collapse. So I waited. I rubbed my wrists and waited for the heavy machinery to arrive. I waited for the excavation of their destruction to begin. I was the architect of this disaster, and I was going to see it through to the final structural failure. The contractor's truck rumbled up the driveway, a beat-up heavy-duty pickup that looked out of place next to the Wyatt's beige sedan. It idled with a throaty growl, the exhaust puffing gray smoke into the evening air. I watched from the kitchen window, nursing my injured hand. The driver didn't get out to chat. He just lowered the hydraulic lift gate and shoved a massive piece of equipment onto the pavement. It was an electric pavement breaker, a beast of a machine painted a chipped industrial yellow. It weighed at least 60 pounds, probably more. The contractor took the wad of cash Hunter handed him without counting. It jumped back in his truck and peeled away. He knew trouble when he saw it, and he wanted no part of whatever was happening at the King residence. Hunter stood in the driveway staring at the machine. It sat there like a monolith, heavy and inert. He looked at the breaker, then at the backyard gate, then back at the breaker. The gate was narrow, and the path was lined with cobblestones I had laid myself. It wasn't going to be an easy roll. He grabbed the handle and tried to drag it. The steel wheels screeched against the concrete, but the bulk of the machine barely moved. Hunter was not a strong man. He had soft hands, the hands of a gambler and a fraud, not a laborer. He pulled again, grunting, his face turning red, but the breaker was dead weight. He turned toward the house and shouted, "Dad, get out here. I need help." Mr. Wyatt came out onto the porch holding a glass of iced tea. He looked at the machine and then at his son with disdain. "I am not lifting that, Hunter," he said, taking a sip. "I have a bad back. You know that." "I don't care about your back," Hunter screamed, his voice cracking with stress. "I paid $5 grand to get this thing here. We need to get it to the pool. Get down here and grab the other end, mister." Wyatt set his glass down on the porch railing with a heavy sigh. He walked down the steps, moving stiffly. He was an old man too, not much younger than me, but he had lived a soft life. He grabbed the front of the machine while Hunter took the handles. On 3, Hunter grunted. 1, 2, 3, lift. They heaved. The machine rose an inch, then slammed back down. Mr. Wyatt cried out, clutching his lower back. "It is too heavy," he whined. "We need a dolly." "We don't have a dolly," Hunter snapped. "Mom, get out here." Mrs. Wyatt appeared in the doorway. She was wearing white linen pants and sandals. She looked at the scene with horror. "You cannot be serious," she said. "I am not touching that greasy thing. Look at my nails, Hunter." "Get down here now," Hunter roared. "Do you want the gold or not? If we don't dig, we don't get paid. And if we don't get paid, we are all dead. Do you understand? Dead." The word hung in the humid air, heavy and absolute. Mrs. Wyatt flinched. She walked down the driveway, stepping gingerly in her expensive sandals. She looked at her husband and son with pure hatred. "Grab the middle," Hunter ordered. And so the three of them, the high society Wyatts, bent their backs to the labor. They grunted and cursed, dragging the heavy steel machine inch by agonizing inch. Mrs. Wyatt broke a nail and screamed a string of profanities that would make a sailor blush. Mr. Wyatt was panting, his face a dangerous shade of purple sweat soaking through his polo shirt. Hunter was shouting orders, abusing them, driving them like mules. It took them 20 minutes to drag the breaker around the side of the house and onto the back patio. By the time they reached the concrete slab, they were exhausted. They collapsed onto the patio furniture, gasping for air, their clothes stained with grease and dirt. They looked less like master criminals and more like a dysfunction circus act. I watched them from the kitchen door, allowing a small, vacant smile to play on my lips. They were already tired. Their tempers were frayed, and the work hadn't even begun. Hunter stood up, wiping sweat from his eyes. He plugged the heavy orange extension cord into the outdoor outlet. He tested the machine. It roared to life, a percussive hammering sound that vibrated the windows. He turned it off. "All right," he said, breathing hard. "It works. Now we need the map." He strode into the kitchen and grabbed me by the arm. He didn't bother with the act anymore. He dug his fingers into my bruise. "Let us go, old man," he said, dragging me outside. "X marks the spot." He pushed me out onto the patio. The heat of the day was fading, but the concrete was still warm, radiating the sun's energy. The slab looked massive, gray, and impenetrable. It was a tombstone, a blank slate covering a multitude of sins. "Where is it?" Hunter demanded, shoving me toward the center of the pool. "Show me exactly where to drill." I stumbled and caught my balance with my cane. I looked around, acting confused, acting like the geography of my own backyard bewildered me. I looked at the rose bushes. I looked at the fence. I looked at the sky. Hunter slapped the back of my head. "Focus. The gold. Where did you bury the box?" I took a deep breath. This was the critical moment. I had to place them perfectly. I had to put them right on top of the body, but I also had to make sure they dug deep enough to hit it without giving up halfway through. The deep end, I mumbled, pointing with my cane. It was right here, near the drain. I walked to the spot where I knew the slope of the pool bottomed out. I tapped the concrete. "Here," I said. "But it is deep." Grandpa didn't want anyone to find it. "How deep?" Mrs. Wyatt asked, walking onto the slab, her heels clicking on the concrete. 5 feet, I lied. Maybe 6. "And there is a cage." "A cage?" Hunter asked, frowning. "What are you talking about?" "Steel," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Rebar, thick as your thumb." I welded a cage around the box. "To stop the thieves, to stop the scanners. You have to cut through the steel, Hunter. You have to break the concrete, then cut the steel." Hunter looked at the spot I was pointing to. He looked at the heavy breaker. He looked at his aging parents. 6 feet of concrete and steel," he muttered. "That is going to take all night." Mr. Wyatt kicked the ground. "We can do it," he said, greed lighting up his tired eyes. "For $3 million, I will dig to China. Let us get started." Hunter grabbed a can of orange spray paint from the pile of tools. He painted a large, crude X on the spot I had indicated. The paint hissed, staining the pristine gray surface. It looked like a target. "Sit over there," Hunter ordered, pointing to a lawn chair in the corner of the patio. "And don't move. If you try to run, I will break your legs with a sledgehammer." I shuffled over to the chair and sat down. I rested my chin on my cane, watching. I was the director of this play, and the actors were taking their places. Hunter dragged the breaker to the X. He lifted the heavy machine, positioning the chisel tip right over the paint. He wrapped his hands around the handles. He looked at his parents. "Put your fingers in your ears," he said. He pulled the trigger. The sound was apocalyptic. It wasn't just a noise, it was a physical assault. The electric motor screamed, and the steel chisel hammered against the concrete with the force of a jackhammer. The sound echoed off the brick walls of the house, amplified by the enclosed yard. It was a staccato roar that shattered the peace of the suburban evening. Dust exploded into the air, a gray cloud of silica and grit. Hunter's body shook violently with the vibration, his teeth rattling in his head. He bore down on the machine, fighting to keep it steady. The concrete chipped and sparked. A small crater began to form. He drilled for 5 minutes straight. The noise was relentless. When he finally let go of the trigger, the silence that followed was ringing and heavy. He was covered in gray dust. His hands were vibrating even after he let go. He looked down. He had made a hole maybe 3 inches deep. "This is going to take forever," he spat, spitting grit. "Keep going," Mrs. Wyatt yelled over the ringing in her ears. "Don't stop." He started again. The hammering resumed, tearing through the neighborhood. I watched the lights in the houses next door flick on. I saw curtains twitch. People were home. People were eating dinner, putting their kids to bed. And now there was a construction site erupting in their backyard. 10 minutes later, the gate rattled. "Hey!" a voice shouted from the other side of the fence. It was Mr. Henderson, my neighbor to the left. He was a retired Marine, a man who valued peace and quiet above all else. "What is going on over there, Booker?" "It is 8 o'clock at night." Hunter froze. He let go of the breaker. He looked at me, panic flaring in his eyes. "Say something," he hissed at me. "Tell him it is a renovation." I didn't say a word. I just stared at him blankly. "Hey!" Henderson shouted again, pounding on the wood. "Cut the racket or I am calling the cops." Hunter grabbed a shovel from the pile of tools. He marched to the fence, his face twisted in a snarl. He wasn't thinking rationally. He was a man protecting his gold, protecting his secret. "Mind your own business, Henderson." Hunter screamed over the fence, his voice cracking. "We are fixing a pipe. It is an emergency." "It doesn't sound like a pipe," Henderson yelled back. "It sounds like you are tearing the foundation apart. You have 5 minutes to shut it down or the police are coming." Hunter slammed the shovel against the fence, the wood splintering. "Call them," he screamed, completely losing control. "Call them and see what happens. This is private property. Get away from my fence or I will come over there and make you regret it." There was a silence on the other side of the fence. A heavy, pregnant silence. Henderson wasn't a man who took threats lightly. "You just made a big mistake, son," Henderson said, his voice low and calm. "A very big mistake." I heard his footsteps retreating. I heard his back door close. Hunter stood there, chest heaving, the shovel gripped in his white knuckles. He turned back to the patio. His parents were staring at him wide-eyed. "He is going to call them," Mrs. Wyatt whispered. "The police are coming." "Let them come," Hunter said, his eyes wild. "We have time. We have to dig faster. We get the gold and we go. We don't stop. We don't stop for anything." He ran back to the breaker. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked possessed. He grabbed the handles and pulled the trigger. The hammering started again, louder and more desperate than before. I sat in my chair and watched. He had just threatened a neighbor. He was creating a disturbance of the peace. He was digging up a body. And he was doing it all while I watched, perfectly safe in my guise of senility. The clock was ticking. The police were coming. And Hunter was digging his way straight to hell. The hammering of the pavement breaker was a relentless rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the pounding of my own heart. Hunter was sweating profusely, his shirt clinging to his back as he wrestled with the machine. A small crater had formed in the concrete, surrounded by jagged chunks of gray debris. It was barely a foot deep. He had 4 more feet to go before he hit the steel cage I had lied about, and another foot of dirt before he hit the corpse he had buried. It was 10 o'clock at night. The neighborhood was quiet except for the construction noise emanating from my backyard. Suddenly, a pair of headlights swept across the front of the house, illuminating the living room window. A car door slammed. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel driveway. Hunter stopped drilling. The sudden silence was jarring. He looked toward the side gate, his eyes wide with fear. "Is it the cops?" Mrs. Wyatt whispered, clutching her husband's arm. Hunter grabbed the shovel again, holding it like a weapon. "Stay here," he hissed. He walked to the gate and peered through the slats. I strained to listen. Hunter Wyatt, a deep, authoritative voice, called out, "Open this gate!" It wasn't the police. It was Harrison. My old friend, my war buddy, my lawyer. He had arrived right on schedule. Hunter hesitated, then unlatched the gate. He opened it just a crack, blocking the entrance with his body. "What do you want?" he demanded. "This is private property." The gate swung open forcefully, pushing Hunter back. Harrison stepped into the yard. He was wearing a dark suit that made him look like an undertaker. He held a leather portfolio in his hand. He looked past Hunter, ignoring him completely, and scanned the yard until his eyes landed on me sitting in the corner. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "I am looking for Booker King." "Harrison," said his voice carrying easily across the yard. "I am his attorney." Hunter stepped in front of Harrison, trying to block his view of the hole in the concrete. "My father-in-law is indisposed," he said quickly. "He is sick. He can't talk right now." "I am not here to talk to him," Harrison said, pulling a document from his portfolio. "I am here to serve notice." He thrust the paper at Hunter. Hunter took it, looking confused. He held it up to the light coming from the kitchen window. "What is this?" he asked. "Notice of seizure," Harrison said, his voice cold and official. "Mr. King has unpaid back taxes dating back 5 years. The IRS has placed a lien on this property. You have 12 hours to vacate the premises before the marshals arrive to lock it down." It was a lie, a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. I had paid my taxes early every year for 40 years, but Hunter didn't know that. Hunter only knew about debts he didn't pay. Hunter only knew fear. 12 hours, Hunter stammered. That is impossible. We live here. Not anymore, Harrison said. The property is being seized. Anything left inside at noon tomorrow becomes property of the state, including whatever construction project you have going on back here. Harrison gestured to the breaker and the pile of rubble. You can't do this, Hunter shouted, crumbling the paper in his fist. This is my house. I have rights. You have nothing, Harrison replied, stepping closer, his face hard. You are a squatter, and if you are not gone by noon, you will be a prisoner. Hunter stared at him, his chest heaving. The walls were closing in. The neighbors were angry, the police were a threat, and now the government was coming to take the land he was standing on, the land that held his salvation and his damnation. He looked back at the hole in the concrete. It was too shallow. He needed time. He needed days, not hours, but he didn't have days. He had tonight. Get out, Hunter whispered. Harrison raised an eyebrow. I am leaving, but the clock is ticking. Noon. Get out, Hunter screamed. He didn't just scream. He reached into the back of his waistband. I saw the glint of steel before anyone else. He pulled out a gun. My gun. The Smith & Wesson revolver I kept in the bedroom safe. He must have broken into it while I was gone. He leveled the gun at Harrison's chest. You get off my land right now, he snarled, his hand shaking so bad the gun barrel wavered like a dowsing rod. Or I will drop you right here, Mrs. Wyatt screamed. Mr. Wyatt ducked behind the patio table. Harrison didn't flinch. He looked at the gun, then at Hunter's face. He had stared down Viet Cong soldiers in the jungle. A desperate accountant with a stolen pistol didn't impress him. That is a serious mistake, son, Harrison said quietly. Assault with a deadly weapon. Threatening an officer of the court. You just added 10 years to your sentence. I am not going to jail, Hunter shouted, spit flying from his mouth. I am getting what is mine. Now move. Harrison looked at me one last time. His eyes said, Be careful. He turned his back on the gun and walked slowly to the gate. He didn't run. He walked with the dignity of a man who knows he has already won. He stopped at the gate. I am calling the police, Harrison said over his shoulder. They will be here in 20 minutes. I suggest you start packing. He walked out and closed the gate. Hunter stood there, the gun still raised, aiming at the empty space where Harrison had been. He was breathing hard, panting like a dog. He is calling the cops. Mrs. Wyatt wailed. We have to go. We have to leave now. No, Hunter said, lowering the gun. We are not leaving. We are close. We just need to dig faster. He turned to his parents, his eyes wild manic. Get in the hole, he ordered. What, mister? Wyatt asked, stepping out from behind the table. Get in the hole, Hunter repeated, pointing the gun at his father. You heard me. The breaker is too slow. We need to move the rubble. We need to dig by hand. Get down there. You are crazy, Mrs. Wyatt said, backing away. I am not getting in that hole. Hunter fired. The shot was deafening. The bullet kicked up dirt right next to Mrs. Wyatt's expensive sandal. She screamed and fell backward onto the grass. Get in the hole, Hunter roared, or the next one goes in your leg. They scrambled. The high society Wyatts, the people who turned their noses up at my soup, who treated me like an animal, crawled on their hands and knees toward the crater in the concrete. They slid down into the hole, their clothes tearing on the jagged edges. Start digging, Hunter commanded, standing over them, the gun in one hand, the shovel in the other. Dig until your fingers bleed. Mr. Wyatt grabbed a piece of rebar and started hacking at the concrete. Mrs. Wyatt used her bare hands to scoop out the dust and grit, sobbing as she worked. Hunter looked at me. I was still sitting in the chair, clutching my cane. You watch them, old man, he said. Make sure they don't stop. He turned back to the breaker. He picked it up, his muscles straining. He didn't care about the noise anymore. He didn't care about the neighbors or the police or the IRS. He only cared about the gold. He pulled the trigger. The hammering started again, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I watched them, a family destroying itself in a pit of its own making. They were covered in dust, sweating, bleeding, terrified. They were digging for a treasure that didn't exist, to pay a debt that didn't matter anymore. They were digging for their lives, and all they were going to find was death. The night wore on. The hole got deeper. They broke through the concrete and hit dirt, dark, damp earth that smelled of rot. Hunter stopped the breaker. He shone a flashlight into the hole. "We are through," he whispered. "We are through the concrete." He looked at his parents huddled in the mud at the bottom of the pit. "Keep going," he said. "The box is right there. Just a few more feet." They dug. They clawed at the earth with their hands. They were animals now, driven by fear and the gun in their son's hand. And then the smell hit them. It started as a faint whiff, something sweet and cloying like rotting fruit. But as they dug deeper, it became stronger, a heavy, suffocating stench of decay. Mrs. Wyatt gagged. She covered her mouth with her muddy hand. "Hunter," she choked. "It smells. It smells like something died." "It is the chemicals," Hunter lied, his voice high and thin. "The chemicals used to treat the gold. Keep digging." But I knew what it was. It was Mike. It was the man Hunter had murdered and buried. It was the truth rising from the grave to confront him. I leaned forward in my chair. I gripped my cane. The climax was approaching. The curtain was about to rise on the final act, and I had a front row seat. The electric breaker finally fell silent, cutting off the mechanical scream that had dominated the night. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavy and suffocating, ringing in my ears like the aftermath of an explosion. Hunter stood panting in the center of the crater, steam rising from his sweat-soaked shirt. He kicked the heavy yellow machine aside. It clattered against the broken chunks of concrete, a discarded toy that had served its purpose. They had broken through. The gray barrier of the pool foundation was shattered, revealing the dark, damp earth beneath. It was the soil of Georgia red clay mixed with black topsoil, heavy and cloying. It was the earth I had moved with my own hands 30 years ago to build this home. And it was the earth Hunter had disturbed 2 days ago to hide his sin. "Get the shovels!" Hunter rasped, his voice raw from screaming over the noise of the breaker. "We are through the hard shell. Now we dig!" Mr. Wyatt groaned. He was slumped against the wall of the pit, his expensive polo shirt ruined, smeared with gray dust and mud. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 hours. His hands were raw blisters, weeping openly on his palms. "I can't, Hunter," he wheezed, clutching his chest. "My heart. I need a break." "There are no breaks," Hunter shouted, pointing the gun at his father. The barrel wavered dangerously. "We are close, Dad. Can't you feel it? We are feet away from $3 million. Pick up the shovel." Mrs. Wyatt was weeping softly, a continuous high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. She was on her hands and knees, clawing at the dirt her manicure destroyed, her dignity gone. She looked up at her son, her makeup streaked with tears and grit. "Hunter, please," she begged. "Let us just go. We can sell the jewelry. We can figure something out." "Dig," Hunter roared, firing a shot into the air. The crack of the pistol was deafening in the enclosed backyard. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. "Dig, or I will bury you right here with the gold." They dug. Driven by a terror more primal than exhaustion, they attacked the earth. The soil was loose, disturbed recently, which made the digging easier physically but harder psychologically. Every scoop of dirt brought up loose roots and stones. And then the smell changed. It had been a subtle underlying note of decay before, masked by the dust of the concrete and the exhaust of the breaker. But as they removed the layer of earth that sealed the grave, the scent bloomed. It was thick and heavy, a sweet, sickly odor that coated the back of the throat and refused to leave. It was the smell of organic matter breaking down in the heat. It was the smell of bloating and gases releasing. It was the smell of Mike. I watched from my chair, my hands resting on my cane. I knew that smell intimately from my time overseas, from construction accidents and war zones. It was unmistakable. But I watched to see if greed was strong enough to mask the scent of death. Hunter paused, leaning on his shovel. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling. "What is that?" he muttered, looking around the dark yard. "Is it a sewer line? Did we hit a pipe?" "Keep digging," I whispered from my chair, my voice carrying across the silent yard. "It is the earth. It is old earth." They kept going. The hole got deeper. The smell got worse. It became a physical presence, a noxious cloud that hovered over the pit. It wasn't just a smell anymore. It was a taste, a greasy coating on the tongue that tasted of copper and rot. Mrs. Wyatt stopped digging. She stood up in the hole, swaying slightly. Her face had gone a sickly shade of green under the layer of dirt. She put a hand to her throat. "Hunter," she gagged. "Oh, God, Hunter. What is it?" he snapped, not looking up from his own frantic shoveling. "The smell," she choked out. "It is not a sewer. I know that smell, when your grandmother died before the undertaker came. It smells like that." She doubled over and vomited. The sound was wet and violent. She retched, heaving up the expensive steak and wine she had consumed earlier right into the hole they were digging. "It is a body," she screamed, wiping her mouth with a trembling hand. "It smells like a dead body." "Hunter, what is down here?" Hunter stopped. He stood frozen, the shovel halfway into the dirt. For a second I saw a flicker of reality in his eyes. The memory of what he had done. The image of the man he had killed with a shovel just like the one he was holding. The fear flashed across his face, stark and terrifying. But then the greed slammed back down like a steel shutter. He shook his head violently, his eyes going wide and bloodshot. He refused to see it. He refused to smell it. If he admitted there was a body, the dream was over. If he admitted the smell was death, he was a murderer, not a millionaire. "No," he screamed, his voice cracking. "No, it is not a body. You are stupid. You are a stupid old woman. It is rotting flesh," Mrs. Wyatt wailed, scrambling to get out of the hole, clawing at the dirt walls. "Let me out. I want out." "Get back down there," Hunter yelled, grabbing her ankle and dragging her back into the mud. "It is the chemicals," he shouted, inventing the lie on the spot, his mind frantically spinning to protect his delusion. "It is the preservatives," the old man told me. "They used chemicals to treat the gold bars to keep them from corroding in the damp soil. Sulfurs and acids. That is what you smell." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for confirmation, pleading for me to sustain his madness. "Tell her, old man," he shrieked, waving the gun at me. "Tell her it is the chemicals. Tell her about the gold treatment." I looked at him. I saw a man whose soul had been completely eroded by avarice. He was standing on top of a corpse, breathing in the stench of his own crime and convincing himself it was the perfume of wealth. "Yes," I said, my voice flat and vacant. "The chemicals, strong stuff, keeps the gold shiny. Grandpa said it smells like the devil's breath. But it keeps the gold safe. See?" Hunter screamed triumphantly, turning back to his parents. "See? It is just chemicals. It is part of the process. It means we are close. The smell means we are right on top of it." Mr. Wyatt looked doubtful. He was holding a handkerchief over his nose, his eyes watering. "It smells like meat, Hunter. Rotten meat." "It is the gold," Hunter insisted, digging furiously now, throwing dirt over his mother's shoes. "Gold doesn't rot, Dad. Think about the money. Think about the debt. Do you want to go to jail for my debts? Or do you want to fly to the Cayman Islands first class?" He was manic. He was digging with a speed that was terrifying to watch. He was a machine fueled by psychosis. "Dig," he chanted. "Dig for the gold. Ignore the smell. It is just the smell of money." Mrs. Wyatt was sobbing, dry heaving, but she picked up her trowel. She was broken. She was terrified of her son, terrified of the gun, and terrified of the poverty that awaited them if they stopped. So she dug. She dug into the reeking earth, crying and retching, convincing herself that the horror she was uncovering was actually her salvation. I watched them, a tableau of madness in the moonlight. They were waist-deep in the grave now. The sides of the hole were steep and slick. They were trapped in there just as surely as Aaliyah had been trapped in the shed. I shifted in my chair. The zip ties on my ankles chafed. I had cut the ones on my wrists hours ago with the shard of glass I had palmed, but I kept my hands behind my back, maintaining the illusion of captivity. I needed them to go deeper. I needed them to expose the body fully before the police arrived. But they were digging too fast. They were reckless. If Hunter struck the body with the shovel blade, if he realized it was soft flesh before he saw it, he might panic and try to cover it up again. I needed him to be careful. I needed him to unveil his crime like a masterpiece. "Psst," I hissed. Hunter stopped wiping sweat and grime from his forehead. He looked up at me, his eyes wild. "What?" he barked. "What do you want?" I leaned forward in the chair, my eyes wide with feigned anxiety. I looked at the hole, then looked around the yard as if checking for spies. "You are close," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Too close. You have to be careful now." Careful of what Hunter asked, climbing halfway out of the hole to hear me better. "The protection," I said. "Grandpa didn't just bury it. He trapped it." "Trapped it?" Mr. Wyatt asked, looking up from the bottom of the pit, his face gray. "Explosives," I whispered. "Mining charges. From the quarry." Hunter went pale. "Explosives? You didn't say anything about explosives." "I forgot," I whined, tapping my head. My memory. It comes and goes. But I remember now. The box. It is rigged. Anti-theft. If you hit it too hard with a shovel, if you crack the casing without disarming it. Boom! I made a small exploding motion with my hands. The house goes, I whispered. The yard goes. We all go. Vaporized. Hunter looked down at the shovel in his hand. He looked at the dirt at his feet. He looked at his parents huddled in the kill zone. You crazy old bat, he whispered. You mind your own backyard. Not me, I said innocently. Grandpa. He said better to destroy the gold than let a thief take it. He said greedy hands should lose their fingers. Mrs. Wyatt screamed. She scrambled up the side of the hole, clawing at the grass, trying to pull herself out. Get me out of here. I am sitting on a bomb. Hunter pushed her back down. Stay there. We are going to die, she shrieked. He said it is rigged. Shut up, Mom, Hunter hissed. We just have to be careful. We have to go slow. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. How do we disarm it? I don't know, I mumbled. There is a code. Or a key. I don't remember. But the trigger is on the lid. Don't hit the lid. You have to brush the dirt away. You have to use your hands. No shovels near the metal. It was the perfect stall. It forced them to put down the heavy tools. It forced them to get on their knees and dig with their fingers. It forced them to get intimate with the earth. Use your hands, Hunter ordered, his voice shaking. Put the shovels down. Scrape the dirt away gently. If you feel metal, stop. Do not hit it. They obeyed. They knelt in the mud, the smell of death surrounding them thick and cloying. They began to scrape at the earth with their bare hands. They were terrified. Every stone they touched made them flinch. Every root they pulled felt like a tripwire. Faster, Hunter urged from the edge of the pit, the gun trained on them. But gently. Don't kill us. I sat back and watched. They were literally digging their own graves with their bare hands. They were caressing the earth that covered the evidence of their crime. They were inching closer to the face of the man they had murdered, thinking they were defusing a bomb to get to a fortune. The tension was palpable. The air was electric with fear. The smell was getting worse. I could see flies beginning to gather, buzzing in the beam of the work light Hunter had set up. Keep going, I whispered into the darkness, just a little deeper. I checked my watch. Harrison had made the call. The police were en route. I had to time the reveal perfectly. I had to make sure the body was exposed the moment the sirens started. I have something. Mr. Wyatt whispered, his voice trembling. I feel something hard. Don't hit it, Hunter screamed, jumping back. Don't hit it! Brush it off, Mrs. Wyatt sobbed. Brush it off gently. They scraped at the dirt. I leaned forward. This was it. Is it the box? Hunter asked, leaning over the edge, the greed warring with the fear of the imaginary bomb. It is soft, mister, Wyatt said, confused. It is wrapped in something. Canvas. Or plastic. The burlap sack, I thought. He wrapped him in drop cloths. It is the protective cover, Hunter said, his voice filled with hope. Unwrap it. Cut it open. The gold is inside. Mr. Wyatt pulled a pocket knife from his pants. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped it. He leaned over the dark shape protruding from the dirt. Do it, Hunter whispered. Cut it. I held my breath. The stage was set. The audience was about to arrive, and the Wyatts were about to open the most expensive package they would ever receive. The three of them were on their knees in the mud, worshiping the god of greed in a temple of filth. Hunter, Mrs. Wyatt, and Mr. Wyatt were huddled together at the bottom of the pit, scraping away the earth with trembling fingers, terrified that one wrong move would trigger the imaginary explosives I had warned them about. Their heads were down, their eyes fixed on the dirt, their backs to me. The work light Hunter had set up cast long, distorted shadows against the brick wall of the house, creating a grotesque puppet show of their desperation. I sat in the lawn chair, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I felt the shard of glass in my palm. It was a jagged piece of the water glass Mrs. Wyatt had forced on me earlier, the one I had pretended to drop in my senile tremors. I had palmed it while they were distracted by the arrival of the pavement breaker. Now it was my key to freedom. I slid the glass between my wrists. The plastic zip tie was thick, industrial grade, but the glass was razor sharp. I began to saw. I had to be careful. One slip and I would slice my own radial artery. I worked the glass back and forth, feeling the friction heat up the plastic. My wrists were raw and bleeding, but I ignored the pain. pain was just information. It told me I was still in the fight. Hunter shouted something at his mother, a curse about her moving too slow. His voice covered the faint rasping sound of the glass cutting the plastic. I sawed harder. Suddenly, the tension gave way. The tie snapped with a soft pop. My hands were free. I didn't move immediately. I kept my hands behind my back, maintaining the illusion. I watched them. They were completely absorbed in their task, terrified of the bomb, terrified of the body, terrified of poverty. They had forgotten about me. I was just a piece of furniture to them, a senile old man who was no longer a threat. That was their fatal mistake. You never turn your back on the engineer until the building is finished. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting in silence. I left the cane leaning against the chair. I wouldn't need it where I was going. I took a step backward onto the grass. The wet earth muffled my footsteps. I moved into the shadows, skirting the edge of the patio light. I was a ghost in my own backyard. I reached the back door. It was open just a crack, the way they had left it in their haste to get the tools. I slipped inside. The cool air of the house hit me, sweat drying instantly on my skin. I moved through the kitchen, past the mess they had made, past the evidence of their intrusion. I went straight to the living room sofa. I reached down into the crevice between the cushions. My fingers brushed the cold plastic of the burner phone I had hidden there earlier. I pulled it out. It was still recording, still capturing the audio of their madness. But audio wasn't enough. Not for what I had in mind. I needed the world to see them. I needed to paint a picture that no lawyer could ever erase. I took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the fire in my legs. I went to the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. This was my room, the room I had shared with my wife, the room that overlooked the entire backyard. I walked to the window. It was dark, but I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want to alert them. I peered through the blinds. The view was perfect. From this angle, I could see everything. The gaping hole in the concrete. The pile of dirt. The 3 figures crawling in the mud like worms. And Hunter standing over them, holding my gun, waving it around like a conductor leading an orchestra of insanity. It looked exactly like what it was, a crime scene in progress. I unlocked my phone. I opened the neighborhood community app, the one the homeowners association used to report lost dogs and suspicious vehicles. It was linked directly to the local police dispatch feed and to the Facebook accounts of 3,000 residents in our district. It was the most powerful weapon I had. I tapped the button that said, "Go live." I propped the phone up on the windowsill, angling it down so the camera lens captured the entire backyard. The work light outside acted as a perfect spotlight, illuminating the Wyatts in high definition. I watched the screen. The counter started at 0, then 1, then 10, then 50. People were awake, people were bored, and people loved a train wreck. I typed a caption with steady fingers. "Murderers digging up a body at 42 Oak Street. Send police." I hit post. I stood there for a second, watching the viewer count climb. 100, 200, comments started popping up on the screen. "Is this real? Oh my God, is that Hunter? Why do they have a gun? Someone call 911. The stage was set. The audience was seated. Now the lead actor had to return to the stage for the final curtain call. I left the phone streaming, a silent electronic witness to their destruction. I turned and ran back down the stairs. I had to be back in that chair before they looked up. I had to be the victim one last time. I slipped out the back door and crept across the grass. They were still digging, still arguing. Hunter was yelling at his father to be gentle, to brush the dirt away. They hadn't noticed I was gone. I sat back down in the lawn chair. I put my hands behind my back, gripping the severed zip tie to make it look intact. I leaned my head forward, letting my mouth hang open. I was back in character. Down in the pit, the energy shifted. Mr. Wyatt stopped scraping. He froze his hand, hovering over the dark shape in the dirt. "Hunter," he whispered, his voice trembling so hard it barely carried to me. "I found the box." Hunter scrambled down into the hole, dropping the shovel but keeping the gun. He pushed his mother aside roughly. She fell back into the mud, whimpering. "Where is it?" Hunter demanded, his eyes wide with a feverish light. "Right here," Mr. Wyatt pointed. "I feel the corner. It is wrapped in canvas." Hunter reached out. His hand hovered over the dirt. He was terrified of the explosives I had invented, but his greed was stronger. He brushed the loose soil away. A dark fabric surface was revealed. It wasn't metal. It was the heavy-duty landscaping fabric Hunter had used to wrap Mike's body. "It is wrapped," Hunter said, his voice filled with awe. He wrapped the gold to protect it. He looked up at me. "You old genius," he shouted. "You wrapped it to keep the moisture out." I nodded slowly, my eyes vacant. "Keep it dry," I mumbled. "Gold likes to be dry." Hunter pulled a box cutter from his pocket. He extended the blade. The click was loud in the silence. "Open it," Mrs. Wyatt hissed, leaning forward, her fear forgotten for a second, replaced by the anticipation of wealth. "Open it, Hunter." Hunter leaned over the shape. He didn't see the shape of a shoulder or a hip. He saw a chest of doubloons. He saw his debts vanishing. He saw his freedom. He pressed the blade against the fabric. I braced myself. This was the moment. The phone in the window upstairs was broadcasting this to the world. The police were minutes away, and Hunter was about to perform the most gruesome unboxing in history. He sliced the fabric. The sound of tearing cloth was sickeningly loud. "Trumpets," he screamed. I hit the jackpot. He grabbed the edges of the fabric and ripped them apart violently, exposing what lay beneath. He expected the glint of gold bars. He expected the shine of wealth. Instead, the work light illuminated a hand. A human hand, gray and bloated. The fingers curled into a claw, reaching up from the grave as if to drag Hunter down with it. A gold watch still sat on the wrist, ticking away the seconds of a dead man's time. The scream that tore out of Mrs. Wyatt's throat was not human. It was the sound of a mind snapping. She scrambled backward, crab walking up the side of the pit, dirt flying from her heels. Hunter didn't scream. He froze. He stared at the hand. He stared at the watch. He knew that watch. He had bought it for Mike as a signing bonus when they started their partnership. He dropped the box cutter. He fell back onto his heels, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no. It is supposed to be gold." He looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a dawning horror that was absolute. He looked at the old man in the chair, the senile fool he had tortured and manipulated, and for the first time he saw me. He really saw me. He saw the clarity in my eyes. He saw the cold, hard intelligence of the engineer. He saw that my hands were not bound. He saw his end. He whispered the word, choking him. I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I stood up straight, my shoulders back, my full height casting a long shadow over the pit. I brushed the dust from my jacket. "Hello, Hunter," I said, my voice strong and steady, deep as the foundation of the house. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Hunter scrambled for the gun he had dropped in the mud. He grabbed at his hands slick with sweat and clay. He pointed it at me. "You lied," he screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You lied to me." I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. "I told you there was a treasure, Booker," I said. "I told you it was buried deep. I just didn't tell you what kind of treasure it was." I pointed at the phone in the window above us. The screen was glowing a beacon in the night. "Smile, son," I said, cold as ice. "You are on TV." Hunter looked up. He saw the phone. He heard the distant wail of sirens getting closer, fast and loud. He looked back at the body, at his parents, cowering in the mud, at the gun in his hand. He realized the trap had closed. The walls had collapsed. And he was standing in the rubble. The wail of the sirens was no longer a distant threat. It was a physical force slamming against the brick exterior of my house. Blue and red lights began to strobe against the trees in the front yard, cutting through the darkness and washing the backyard in a chaotic fever dream of color. The neighborhood, which had been sleeping or watching silently from behind curtains, was now awake and buzzing. Tires screeched on the asphalt out front. Heavy doors slammed. The cavalry had arrived. Down in the pit, Hunter stood frozen. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing building. He looked at the gate where the police were seconds away from breaching. He looked at the corpse of Mike, the man he had murdered and tried to turn into a fortune, lying in the mud at his feet. He looked at his parents cowering in the dirt, covered in filth and shame. He knew it was over. There was no running to Mexico. There were no millions of dollars. There was only a life sentence in a concrete box much smaller than the house he had tried to steal. His head snapped up toward the window. Toward me. The look on his face was not fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the look of a rabid animal that knows it is dying and wants to take one last bite out of the world. He realized that I had orchestrated every second of this. I had played him. I had humiliated him. I had dangled a carrot in front of his face and led him straight off a cliff. He screamed, his voice cracking over the sound of the approaching sirens. You did this. You ruined everything. He raised the gun. My Smith & Wesson revolver, heavy and black, looked huge in his shaking hand. He leveled it at the window. He aimed it directly at my chest. The distance was short, less than 30 feet. At that range, he couldn't miss. I tricked you, he yelled, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. I am going to kill you, Booker. I am going to take you with me. I stood there in the window frame. I didn't duck. I didn't flinch. I didn't drop the phone that was still broadcasting his breakdown to thousands of witnesses. I just watched him. I watched the desperation in his eyes. I watched the way his finger curled around the trigger. Any other man would have been terrified. Any other man would have thrown himself to the floor, praying the glass would deflect the bullet. But I was not any other man. I was Booker King. I was a structural engineer. And a structural engineer never builds a system without a failsafe. Hunter squeezed the trigger. I saw the tendon in his hand tighten. I saw the hammer of the revolver pull back. Click. The sound was small, sharp, and impotent. It was the sound of metal striking metal with nothing to propel it. There was no explosion. There was no muzzle flash. The glass in front of me did not shatter. Hunter blinked. He looked at the gun in his hand, confusion warring with his rage. He didn't understand. He pulled the trigger again. Click. He pulled it again and again, squeezing frantically. Click, click, click. The cylinder rotated. The hammer fell, but the gun remained silent. It was a paperweight, a useless lump of steel. Hunter stared at the weapon. He shook it. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief. Why? Why isn't it working? I leaned closer to the glass. I pressed my forehead against the cool pane, looking down at him like a god judging a sinner. I spoke loud enough for my voice to carry over the sirens, loud enough for the microphone on the phone to pick it up, loud enough for him to hear it in his soul. I am an engineer. Hunter, I said, my voice booming in the night. I understand mechanics. I understand how things work. And I understand failure points. He stared up at me, the gun hanging loosely in his hand now. I never trusted you, I said. Not from the day you walked into my house, not from the day you married my daughter. I saw the way you looked at my things. I saw the greed in your eyes. I paused, letting the words sink in. That gun has been in my safe for 10 years, I continued. But the day you moved in, the day you brought your debts and your lies into my home, I took it apart. I removed the firing pin, Hunter. His eyes went wide. The firing pin. The tiny piece of metal that strikes the primer that ignites the powder. Without it, a gun is just a complex club. I kept the firing pin in my pocket for a week, I said. And then I threw it in the river. Because I knew that one day a man like you would try to use it against me. I knew you were dangerous. I just didn't know how sloppy you were. Hunter looked at the gun with horror. He had been holding it all night. He had threatened his parents with it. He had threatened me with it. He had felt powerful. He had felt like a king. And all the while he had been holding a toy. His power was an illusion, just like his wealth, just like his success, just like his love for my daughter. It was all fake. You old bastard, he whispered. He raised his arm to throw the gun at the window, to try and break the glass, to try and hurt me one last time. But he never got the chance. The front gate of the driveway exploded inward. It didn't just open, it was rammed. An armored police vehicle smashed through the wrought iron, tearing the hinges from the brick columns. The metal shrieked and twisted. Police officers in tactical gear swarmed through the gap. They poured into the backyard, a river of dark uniforms and blinding lights. Police dropped the weapon. A voice amplified by a loudspeaker roared, "Get on the ground, now!" Hunter spun around. He was blinded by the tactical lights mounted on the rifles. Red laser dots danced across his chest, his face, his hands. He was surrounded. There were officers on the fence line, officers coming through the side gate, officers on the roof of the neighbor's garage. He stood there for a second, swaying. He looked at the useless gun in his hand. He looked at the body of Mike at his feet. He looked at the pit he had dug. "Drop it," the voice commanded again. Hunter dropped the gun. It landed in the mud with a wet plop. He raised his hands slowly. He was shaking violently now, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He didn't look like a monster anymore. He looked like a frightened child who had broken something he couldn't fix. "Get down on the ground," the officer shouted. "Face down, hands behind your head." Hunter sank to his knees. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He knelt in the dirt right next to the corpse he had unearthed. He bowed his head, submitting to the inevitable. Two officers rushed forward. One of them kicked Hunter flat, driving his face into the mud. They grabbed his arms and wrenched them behind his back. I heard the distinct metallic ratchet of handcuffs clicking into place. "Got him," one officer shouted. "Subject is secure." They hauled him up. His face was covered in the same mud that covered Mike. He looked at the body one last time as they dragged him away. He didn't look remorseful. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man who was angry he had been caught, not sorry for what he had done. Other officers were moving into the pit. Mr. Wyatt was huddled in the corner, his hands over his head, sobbing. Mrs. Wyatt had woken up from her faint and was screaming hysterically as an officer pulled her to her feet. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. "Do you know who I am? This is a mistake. My son did this. It was all him. They cuffed her. They didn't care who she was. To them, she was just another suspect found at the scene of a murder covered in grave dirt. They cuffed Mr. Wyatt, too. He didn't resist. He just kept muttering about his heart, about his back, about how it wasn't fair. I watched it all from the window. I watched as they were led away in a line, the Wyatts and their son, the family that had thought they were better than me. They were paraded past the body, past the hole, past the house they had tried to steal. The blue lights flashed, illuminating the scene in staccato bursts. The backyard was a crime scene now marked off with yellow tape. Officers were taking photos. A coroner's van was backing into the driveway. I turned away from the window. My legs felt heavy. My adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted and achy. I picked up the phone. The live stream was still running. The comments were going wild, celebrating the arrest, cheering for justice. I looked into the camera one last time. "It is done," I said quietly. "They are gone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being my witnesses." I ended the stream. I put the phone in my pocket. I walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs. The house was quiet again. The music was gone. The shouting was gone. The only sound was the crackle of police radios coming from the backyard. I walked to the front door. It was open. An officer was standing guard. He looked at me, his eyes widening. "Sir," he said. "Are you Mr. King?" "I am," I said, straightening my tie, smoothing my jacket. "This is my house. We have an ambulance on the way, sir," he said. "Are you injured?" "I am fine," I said. "Just tired." I walked past him onto the front porch. The cool night air hit my face. It felt clean. It felt like rain. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb. The back door opened. Aaliyah stepped out. She was wrapped in a gray police blanket holding a bottle of water. She looked frail and scared, her eyes darting around searching for danger. Then she saw me standing on the porch. "Daddy," she cried, running up the driveway. I met her halfway. I caught her in my arms. She buried her face in my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her tight, my hands stroking her hair. "I got you, baby," I whispered. "I got you. It is over." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears and grime. "Is he gone?" she asked. "He is gone," I said. "He is never coming back." She looked toward the house, toward the backyard. She shuddered. "He is in the mud, Daddy," she whispered. "He is in the mud with Mike." "No," I said, turning her face back to me. "He is in handcuffs, and Mike is going to get a proper burial, and we are going to be okay." Harrison pulled up in his car, parking behind the police cruiser. He got out looking rumpled but satisfied. He walked over to us. "Good work, Booker," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You cut it close." "I had to be sure," I said. "You got him," Harrison said. "The DA is already on the phone. With the video, with the body, with the confession, they are going away for a long time. All of them." "What about the house?" Aaliyah asked, looking at the structure behind us. "It is a crime scene." "It is a house," I said firmly. "It is just wood and brick and concrete. We can clean it. We can fix it." I looked at the house. It was battered. The gate was broken. The backyard was a disaster. But the foundation was strong. I had poured it myself. "We will rebuild," I said. "We are kings. That is what we do." Aaliyah nodded, wiping her eyes. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I want to go home, Daddy," she said. "Not here. Somewhere else. Just for tonight." "We will go to a hotel," I said. "We will get room service. We will sleep for a week." I led her toward my truck. I looked back one last time at the scene. The police were swarming the pit. The neighbors were watching from their lawns. It was a spectacle, but it was also a victory. I had faced the wolves in my own den, and I had skinned them alive. I had protected my cub. I climbed into the truck. My knee hurt. My ribs hurt. But my heart was light. "Let us go," I said, starting the engine. We drove away, leaving the lights and the sirens behind us. We drove into the quiet darkness of the morning, ready to start over, ready to build something new, something stronger on the ashes of the old. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers finally stopped swirling and settled into a steady, protective glow. The chaos of the raid had transformed into the organized, clinical precision of a crime scene investigation. I sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, a paramedic checking my blood pressure, but my eyes never left the entrance of the driveway. I was waiting for the most important arrival of the night. A patrol car pulled up slowly, its tires crunching on the gravel that was still scattered from the SWAT team's breach. The back door opened and Aaliyah stepped out. She looked small, wrapped in a heavy blanket, but she was walking under her own power. The police had picked her up from the motel room where I had hidden her safe and sound, just as I had promised. She scanned the scene, her eyes wide, taking in the yellow tape, the officers moving with purpose, and the handcuffed figures of the Wyatts being loaded into transport vans. Then she saw me. "Daddy!" She choked out the word, tearing from her throat like a sob. She broke into a run, ignoring the officer who tried to steady her. I slid off the tailgate, my bad knee protesting, but holding firm. I opened my arms, and she collided with me, hitting my chest with the force of a freight train. She buried her face in my neck, her tears hot against my skin. She was shaking violently, releasing days of terror and trauma. I held her tight, my large, rough hands smoothing her hair, shielding her from the sight of the pit in the backyard. "I got you, baby girl," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I got you. It is over. The monsters are gone." She clung to me, her fingers digging into my jacket as if she were afraid I would vanish if she let go. "I saw it, Daddy." She sobbed into my shoulder. "I saw the live stream on the officer's phone. You saved us. You walked right back into the fire for me. I would burn the whole world down for you," I said, kissing the top of her head. "You know that." A heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I looked up to see Sheriff Miller standing there. We had known each other for 20 years, played poker on alternating Fridays, and argued about football at the barber shop. Tonight, he wasn't my card buddy. He was the man who had come to save my life. He looked tired, his face grim, but his eyes held a deep respect. He looked at the hole in the backyard where the coroner team was now carefully working, and then back at me. "You cut it close," Booker Miller said, shaking his head. "You cut it damn close." "I had to be sure, Jim," I said, keeping one arm around my daughter. "I couldn't let them talk their way out of this. You know how slippery Hunter is." Miller nodded, spitting on the ground. "Not anymore. We have the body, we have the weapon, we have the confession on audio. And thanks to your little broadcast, we have about 5,000 witnesses. You gave us irrefutable proof, Booker. Solid as concrete." He paused, looking at the transport van where Hunter sat, his face pressed against the wire mesh of the window, staring at us with dead eyes. "He won't be hurting anyone ever again," Miller promised. "I will make sure of that personally. Go get some rest, Booker. We will hold the scene. Go take care of your girl." I nodded, grateful. I guided Aaliyah toward my truck. We weren't staying here tonight. The house was a crime scene, a broken shell. But it was still standing, and so were we. The legal fallout was swift, brutal, and absolute. 3 days later, we sat in Harrison's office. The room smelled of old leather and expensive cigars, a stark contrast to the mud and rot of the pit. Harrison sat behind his massive oak desk, looking like a judge handing down a sentence from on high. He placed a stack of files on the desk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. He looked at me and then at Aaliyah, who was sitting beside me, holding my hand. "It is done," Harrison said, his voice grim but satisfied. "The district attorney is not looking to make a deal. The evidence is too overwhelming." He opened the first file. "Hunter Wyatt is being charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, aggravated assault, and attempted murder." Harrison listed the charges, ticking them off on his fingers. Because of the premeditated nature of the crime, the financial motive, and the heinous way he disposed of the body, the state is seeking the death penalty. Aaliyah squeezed my hand, her grip tightening. "Death," she whispered. "He buried a man alive," Aaliyah Harrison said gently but firmly. "Or close enough to it. And he planned to do the same to your father. Georgia law is very clear on this. He is going to death row." I felt a cold shiver pass through me. I didn't take joy in the death of another man, even one as evil as Hunter. But I felt a sense of balance, a structural correction. And the parents, I asked. Harrison opened the second file. Conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact, fraud, and elder abuse. They are both over 65. The prosecution is pushing for life without parole. Given their age, it is a death sentence by another name. They will die in prison, Booker. They will never see the outside of a cell again. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. And there is more. The court has granted an immediate seizure of all Wyatt assets to pay for restitution and legal fees. Their house, their cars, their retirement accounts, everything. It is all being liquidated. The money will go to Mike's family and to cover the damages to your property. They lost everything, I said quietly. They gambled everything, Harrison corrected. And they lost. They wanted your house, Booker. Now they don't even have their own. He pushed a document across the desk toward me. It was the deed to my house. Clean, clear, and safe. The trust is secure, Harrison said. The property is yours. No one can touch it. Not now, not ever. I took the paper. It felt light in my hand, but I knew the weight it carried. It was my legacy. It was the foundation I had fought to protect. Thank you, Harrison, I said. He smiled, a rare expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Don't thank me. You did the work, engineer. I just filed the paperwork. You brought the house down on them. 6 months later, the Georgia heat had turned from oppressive to a gentle warmth. I stood on the back patio, holding a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. The backyard was transformed. The concrete scar was gone. I had hired a crew to break it up properly, to haul away the evidence of Hunter's greed. We had filled the hole not with dirt and secrets, but with rich, dark soil. Aaliyah walked out to join me. She looked healthy again. The shadows under her eyes were gone, replaced by a light that had been missing for years. She was working again, designing websites, finding her own way in the world, free from the weight of a husband who had never loved her. She stood beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. We looked out at the garden. Where the pool had been, where the pit of death had gaped open like a wound, there was now a sea of red. We had planted roses, hundreds of them, thorny, resilient bushes with deep roots and blood-red blooms. They filled the air with a sweet, clean fragrance that masked any lingering memory of decay. "It is beautiful, Daddy," she whispered. "It is." I agreed, taking a sip of coffee. I walked off the patio and down the stone path. My knee still clicked when I walked, a permanent reminder of the night I jumped from the window, but I walked tall. I approached the rose garden. I reached out and touched one of the blooms, careful of the thorns. The soil here was fertile. It had been turned and aerated. It held the history of what happened, but it had been repurposed. We hadn't paved over the past, we had grown something new from it. I looked at the house. It was repaired. The gate was fixed better and stronger than before. The paint was fresh. It was a fortress again, but it was also a home. I thought about Hunter sitting in a cell waiting for a needle. I thought about his parents rotting in general population. They had looked at me and seen a victim. They had seen gray hair and assumed weakness. They had seen a slow walk and assumed a slow mind. They had made the mistake that so many predators make. They forgot that the old wolf is not old because he is lucky. He is old because he is dangerous. I looked at Aaliyah smiling in the morning sun. She was safe. My job was done. I turned back to the roses. The world is full of people who want to eat the elderly, I thought to myself, my internal monologue as clear and sharp as a blueprint. They look at us and see easy prey. They see soft targets. But they forget one thing. I snapped a dead leaf off the rose bush, my fingers strong and calloused. Old meat is tough. It is gristle and iron. It doesn't chew easy. And old bones, I thought, looking at the red flowers that bloomed from the deep earth, old bones are sharp. If you try to swallow us whole, you will choke. I turned back to the house. "Come on, baby girl," I called to my daughter. "Let us get some breakfast. I am starving." We walked inside, leaving the roses to guard the yard, leaving the past in the dirt where it belonged. We had survived. We had won. And we were just getting started. They looked at my gray hair and saw a victim failing to realize that age isn't just decline. It is the accumulation of wisdom, patience, and the grit to survive. Hunter thought he was the predator because he had youth and aggression, but he forgot that a structure built on the rotten foundation of greed and lies is destined to collapse. I built my life on concrete, steel, and love materials that do not yield under pressure. To anyone out there feeling underestimated or discarded, remember the old wolf isn't old because he is lucky. He is old because he is dangerous. We are the architects of our own defense, and we never break. If you believe justice was truly served today, hit that like button and subscribe to see more wolves in sheep's clothing get exactly what they deserve.